Duke Klaus of Baltasar sits in a dim room, watching a green-haired servant boy with his head lowered. Blue magic light crosses Klaus's face as the boy admits he has business with him. Klaus steps close and blocks the wall beside the boy's head. He leans to the boy's neck and inhales, then questions assent despite prior warning. The servant denies it. Klaus calls him Antonio de Hessink and demands to know what he is hiding. Sweat forms. Inside, panic rises. She fears he has realized she is a woman disguised as a man. His grip tightens on her shoulder. She feels trapped, fearing events are repeating. 3 months earlier, a bottle shatters against a red wall. Roselia de Hessink lies on the floor as her disheveled brother Antonio demands money. The estate has collapsed since the Baron fell ill. He grabs her hair. She draws a dagger, then cuts off her own long hair and offers it as the last thing of value. He takes it and leaves. She chooses survival over pride. Antonio walks through a freezing alley at night. 3 large men close in and block his path. Debt collectors. One grabs him and demands payment for his gambling debt. Darkness swallows the outcome. Inside the mansion, Roselia changes into men's clothing. She binds her chest with white bandages. Antonio never went that far in the original story, so she must take his place. A loose white shirt hangs off her frame. She studies her reflection and waits for the man who provides for this body. In the original plot, Roselia de Hessink became the Duke's maid, endured exploitation in silence, and died as a forgotten extra. Even the thought of that fate fills her with disgust at the body she now lives in. She understands the Duke will try to hire her as a maid. She straightens her cravat, fully dressed as a man. 3 years have passed since she entered this novel. Every step led to this moment. She closes her eyes and rejects the ending written for her. The original Roselia fell in love with the Duke. She will not repeat that mistake. Debts can be repaid in many ways. Her first rule is simple: never please the Duke. Outside, the Hessink mansion sits under clear daylight, vines crawling over cracked walls. The estate looks abandoned. Klaus of Baltasar stands at the gate, staring at the ruin. His aide confirms the address. The decay makes it nearly unrecognizable. Klaus remains unimpressed. Even if he sells the mansion, it will not cover half of Baron Hessink's debt. Papers confirm the Baron is dead. The eldest son, Antonio, inherited everything including what he owes. The aide continues reading. The Baron had a daughter, Roselia de Hessink. She reportedly died of illness a few days ago. Klaus listens without emotion and calls the situation shameful. Roselia steps out, disguised as her brother. Dressed as a young man, she faces them calmly. She asks if he is Duke Klaus of Baltasar. The aide greets her. Klaus studies the supposed hair with sharp, unreadable eyes. She extends her hand and introduces herself as Antonio de Hessink, the eldest son of the Baron. She smiles with practiced ease while silently vowing never to fall in love with this man. She bows, hand over her chest, offering her service. Klaus looks down at the smaller figure. He steps closer and asks if Antonio knows who he is. She feigns surprise, laughs lightly, and answers with proper respect. Sweat gathers at her temple. Klaus states his purpose. He has come to collect the late Baron's debt. 5,000 barangs. Her eyes widen. The amount is enough to buy 3 large mansions. Even if this estate is sold, it would not cover everything. Klaus crosses his arms and asks how Antonio plans to repay the rest. She keeps her composure and admits she cannot pay now. She asks for 1 year and promises to repay it all within that time. Klaus questions her ability. Rumors say Antonio left the academy and became a drunk with no talent. She laughs awkwardly and admits the reputation is not wrong. Then her gaze sharpens. She claims she has a powerful weapon and has not wasted her time. He shows faint interest. She thinks of her true advantage: a mana crystal mine, a sunken treasure ship. But art is simpler. The Crown Princess favors artists. Unknown painters will rise in value. She only needs to reach them first. She explains that she will use information from the backstreets and her keen eye to purchase valuable art. Klaus says it sounds plausible but asks the obvious question: how will she buy anything without money? She answers brightly that every business needs initial capital. Then she asks him to lend her 20 barangs. Silence falls. Klaus stares at her. He asks if she intends to increase her debt. She confirms without hesitation. After a long pause, he agrees to trust her once. She promises to turn 20 into 500 within 2 months. He lends the money but makes his doubt clear. She bows deeply in thanks. He turns to leave, then stops. 2 large men appear behind her. There is a condition. One grabs her arm. The other lifts her off the ground. She panics as they restrain her. Klaus walks away and calls her Antonio. He asks how he can trust her and what happens if she runs after making empty promises. She stammers, unable to answer. He turns back and states his terms. Until the debt is fully repaid, Antonio will remain under his supervision. Once the mansion is sold, there will be nowhere else to go. She freezes. She had not thought that far ahead. Klaus decides to take her word with control. Until the debt is cleared, the disguised heir will serve the ducal household. The men carry her away despite her struggle. Sunlight spills over the courtyard as she is dragged across the stones. She tried to avoid becoming a maid. Instead, disguised as a man, she becomes the Duke's servant. Roselia walks through the dining hall, chest tight beneath the binding. Each breath burns. Air will not fill her lungs. A young woman with long silver hair suddenly runs toward them. A maid chases after her. Roselia looks up in confusion. The girl trips and falls straight into her arms. Roselia catches her. She is is shockingly light, soft. The girl looks up and questions how long she plans to hold her. Roselia flinches and releases her at once. They step apart. The girl studies her with open curiosity and asks if she is a new servant. The Duke's aide rushes over, breathless, addressing the girl as Lady. Roselia wonders if she is Klaus's sister. The silver-haired girl circles her with interest, then smiles. She finds the disguised here handsome. She likes pretty things. Roselia forces an awkward response. The girl suddenly declares that from today on, this servant will be her il domestico. She is Lady Closet de Balthazar of the Lugbelzet Empire. Shock spreads across Roselia's face. The aide reacts the same. Il domestico is a trend among noble ladies, keeping a handsome servant as decoration. Roselia recalls hearing about it. She tries to decline politely, but a maid bursts in screaming for the lady. Closet ignores the chaos and announces she will bring Roselia to tomorrow's gathering. She runs off. Roselia calls after her, too late. The maid chases Closet, shouting about skincare. Silence returns. The aide forces a strained smile and calls Roselia lucky. It is a privilege to catch the lady's eye on the first day. Roselia feels horror instead of pride. She wants no part of this. That night, moonlight spills into her room. She drops onto the bed, exhausted. She stares at the ceiling. She has no time to trail behind a self-centered noble lady. Her thoughts shift to the Duke. She promised to turn 20 birangs into 500 in 2 months. Failure is not an option. She wonders why Alejandro has not delivered the money yet. A faint rustling sound irritates her. If someone is coming, they should hurry. The day feels suffocating. She sits by the window and clutches her chest. The binding digs into her ribs. Finally, she unwraps the cloth. Fabric loosens. Air rushes in. She spreads her arms on the bed and breathes freely. She walks across the room in a loose shirt, relieved but drained. This life feels unbearable. She lies down again, convinced no one will come at this hour. A knock cuts through the silence. She freezes. The handle turns. The door opens while she stands unbound. Panic explodes. She grabs the bandages, fumbling to wrap them back around her chest. She barely covers herself as the visitor steps inside. She looks up, expecting Alejandro. Instead, Duke Claus stands there in a casual black shirt. Shock floods her face. She laughs nervously and admits she thought someone else was coming. He explains Alejandro had business outside, so he came instead. He holds an envelope. His gaze sharpens. She is clutching a massive blue vase filled with purple flowers against her chest. He asks why. She claims she is moving it because she disliked its placement. He questions the timing. She insists. He extends the envelope. It contains the promised 20 barangs. She cannot take it. Her arms are locked around the vase. The weight strains her muscles. He tells her to put it down. She refuses. She has not decided where it belongs. Sweat runs down her face. The vase feels unbearable. She forces confidence and assures him he will not regret it. He turns to leave. She quickly asks him to close the door on his way out, explaining her hands are full. He glances back, puzzled, but shuts it. The door clicks. The instant he is gone, she drops the vase. It slams onto the floor. She collapses beside it, gasping for air, chest heaving. If this continues, she will die before her debt is paid. Morning light floods a grand conservatory. Lady Closet laughs brightly among a circle of noblewomen. Roselia stands rigid at her side, trapped in her role. Earlier that day, Closet had dragged her into a carriage without listening to her refusal. Now she endures the tea gathering. She cannot afford to offend the lady. Survival comes first. The noblewomen whisper about the new il domestico. They admire his delicate features, dark green hair and striking emerald eyes. One comments that he is so pretty he could pass for a woman. Roselia stiffens but keeps her smile. Closet proudly announces that Antonio was born a noble, which explains his refined posture. She looks to him for agreement. Roselia confirms it calmly. The ladies swoon over his gentle voice. She decides to lean into the act. Wealthy women with influence could become useful allies. One guest presents a red jewelry box from the Western Empire. Inside lies a floral accessory. She does not know how to use it. Closet identifies it as a hairbine. Roselia steps forward and explains that while uncommon here, it is popular in the Refilios Empire. She asks permission to demonstrate. With steady hands, she threads the piece through the woman's hair. The lady blushes under her touch. When finished, she checks a mirror and gasps in delight. The style transforms her appearance. The surrounding women fall silent. Then erupt in excitement, they crowd closer, asking for the same treatment. Closet's expression darkens at being overshadowed. She calls Antonio's name sharply and demands to go first. Roselia suppresses a sigh and obeys. Later, inside the carriage, Closet hums in high spirits. She remarks that Antonio is unexpectedly skilled with women's hair. Roselia claims she often styled her younger sister's hair. Closet looks surprised. Roselia lowers her gaze and says her sister died recently. The lie tastes bitter, but sympathy is useful. Closet's eyes fill with tears. She clasps his hands and expresses outrage that someone grieving must also suffer under heavy debt. Guilt flickers through Roselia, but she stays silent. Closet asks the amount owed. Roselia answers 5,000 barangs. Closet freezes. Even for nobility, it is staggering. Roselia quickly explains that after selling part of the estate, around 200 barangs remain. She already has a plan to repay it. Relief softens Closet's face. She proposes a deal. Antonio will serve as her il domestico 3 days each week. In exchange, she will provide a generous salary. Roselia accepts with gratitude. Closet beams and adds another condition. He must do her hair whenever she wishes. She laughs, saying it feels like gaining a younger sister. The carriage slows to a stop. Closet's smile fades. She looks out the window, expression suddenly heavy. Quietly, she apologizes. Roselia looks at Closet closet in confusion and asks what she is apologizing for. Closet lowers her gaze, frustration tightening her face. She vents about her brother caring only about money despite being family. She declares she will apologize on behalf of the duchy. Roselia waves her hands, insisting it is unnecessary. Closet refuses. She stares out the carriage window, expression dark, and vows that one day Klaus will face consequences. Roselia falls silent. Closet suddenly realizes Roselia is alone under her brother's authority. Her expression softens. She promises that as long as Antonio stays by her side, no one will trouble him. He is part of her personal staff now. She will protect him. Roselia smiles politely and accepts. The carriage arrives at the ducal estate. As they walk toward the entrance, Closet cheerfully invites Antonio to dine with her. Roselia hesitates, reminding her she is only a servant. Closet dismisses it. He is a noble too. A tall figure blocks their path. Klaus stands at the entrance, cold and imposing. Closet glares at him. He ignores her and calls Antonio to follow. Roselia bows. Klaus remarks that she seems free if she has time to accompany Closet. He asks whether she has already gathered the 500 barangs. He presses further. If she has leisure to socialize, she must not be desperate. Roselia answers that he gave her 2 months. He acknowledges it but says even starting now may barely be enough time. She smiles calmly and tells him not to worry. As a servant, she could not refuse Closet's request. Inside, she bristles at his tone. She bows and excuses herself. A servant carrying a large vase of roses suddenly stumbles. The vase flies toward Closet. Roselia reacts instantly. She throws herself forward. The vase shatters. Water explodes across the floor. Her body takes the impact. Closet screams her name. Roselia collapses, drenched. Shards and roses scatter. The servant trembles in fear. She pushes herself upright, water dripping from her hair. She apologizes automatically and forces a smile, though frustration churns inside. Closet rushes to her, panicked, asking if she is hurt. Klaus steps closer, stern, telling her to be careful. He offers a stiff apology. Roselia shivers in soaked clothes. She needs to change. Klaus's eyes narrow. He stares at her chest. He asks if she is injured. Confused, she wipes water from her face. He points out the bandage visible beneath her wet shirt. Shock hits her. The binding shows clearly through the fabric. He questions her again. If she is not hurt, why wear a bandage? Sweat beads along her temple. Panic floods her mind. She has no answer. Closet watches, then steps in firmly. She states that he is injured. It happened because of her. Both Klaus and Roselia look at her. Closet claims Antonio slipped while helping her from the carriage and hurt his back catching her. Klaus studies Roselia, skeptical. Inside, Roselia exhales in relief. Klaus falls silent. Then he unexpectedly offers an apology, accepting the explanation. Closet bristles and snaps at him for apologizing on her behalf. She challenges him, questioning when he ever cared about her safety. Klaus says nothing. The siblings lock eyes, tension crackling between them. Roselia stands between them, caught in the heat. Klaus finally looks at her again and calls her name. She startles. His expression softens slightly. He tells her not to push her body too hard. Her body was not hers until the debt was repaid. Roselia stood there sweating under his gaze, forcing herself to agree, nodding quickly and saying she would remember it. He turned away without waiting for another response. Closet watched his back as he left, her hands trembling, anger rising in her chest. It infuriated her how he could silence everyone with a single sentence. Roselia, uneasy under heavy air, softly called out to her. Closet snapped out of it. Roselia asked why she had helped him. Closet hesitated, looked away for a moment, then admitted it was because he had looked worried. Roselia blinked in surprise. Closet straightened and declared that she had already promised to protect him from that cold-blooded man. Roselia felt guilt twist inside her and reminded Closet that she did not even know why he was covered in bandages. Closet asked if that even mattered. Maybe there were scars he did not want to show. Either way, it must have been hard. Roselia stared at her, struck by how bright and straightforward she was. Her face warmed before she quietly agreed. Closet suddenly remembered the upcoming tea party for the Marcus's daughter and told him all he had to do was stand there looking handsome. Roselia stiffened but nodded obediently. Closet waved him off and told him to change before he caught a cold. Roselia hurried away, shivering in the damp clothes. Later, in Algrisha, Roselia stepped down from a carriage wearing a brown suit and cap, perfectly disguised as a young man. She thanked the driver and looked around. This was the village where the first painting that captured the original heroine's heart had appeared. The place where the heroine began supporting unknown artists. Roselia walked through the market, scanning every stall for artwork. Vendors shouted about fresh fish, but there were no paintings in sight. Her steps grew faster, anxiety creeping in. An old woman nearby noticed her restless searching and asked what she was looking for. Roselia politely asked if anyone here sold paintings. The old woman mentioned Abel, then added that she had not seen him in a while. Shock flashed across Roselia's face. She pressed for answers, but the woman only pointed her toward his house. Roselia followed the directions until she stopped before a worn wooden house. She remembered the detail from the novel. A rose drawing stuck to the door. There it was. A rough sketch of roses. She stepped into the overgrown yard and knocked. No answer. Panic rose in her throat. If things unfolded like the original story, she would be too late. She knocked harder, calling for Abel. The door suddenly creaked open. A disheveled man with long hair and a rough beard glared at her, irritated by the pounding. Artist Abel Huntham. Roselia froze for a second, then glanced past him and spotted a painting inside. A woman holding a child, exactly as described in the novel. Relief flooded her. She had found the right place. The future hair princess's first collection. She introduced herself politely as Antonio and explained she had come after seeing continuing his work. Before she could finish, the door slammed shut in her face. She stood there stunned, staring at the wood. Confusion quickly turned into frustration. She knocked again, demanding to talk. As she stepped back, she noticed a small blonde girl peeking from behind the house. Roselia approached gently and asked if she lived there. The child crouched down and said her mother told her not to speak to strangers. Roselia paused, reminded again that she appeared as a man. Of course the child would be wary. She softened her voice and asked why she was alone. There was no answer. Realizing she might be frightening her, Roselia apologized and turned to leave. A loud stomach growl broke the silence. The girl murmured weakly for her mother. Roselia stopped. Something was wrong. The house was poorly maintained, the yard neglected, and the child looked uncared for. A cold thought crept into her mind. Elsewhere in Algrisha, Duke Klaus arrived with his aide Alejandro. Alejandro questioned why the Duke intended to build a school in such a place. Klaus looked over the town calmly and corrected him. This was not merely a small town. Algrisha was the gateway connecting the capital and the duchy. Merchants constantly passed through it. When both regions became saturated, this town would inevitably expand. That was why he intended to establish a school here for commoners and the middle class. Alejandro looked impressed. Klaus answered flatly that he had always ranked first at the academy, so long-term planning was nothing unusual for him. When asked whether anything was difficult for him, he simply suggested they inspect the market first. Meanwhile, in front of Abel's neglected house, Roselia pieced everything together. The crucial difference between herself and the lady in the original story was gender. Inside, Abel sat with alcohol in hand while Erlin watched the window quietly. Roselia returned wearing a blonde wig, dressed as a woman. The moment the door opened, Erlin's eyes widened. She ran forward and threw herself into Roselia's arms, crying for her mother. Roselia froze, arms hovering awkwardly as the child clung to her dress. Abel hurried over in panic, apologizing while pulling Erlin back. His wife had passed away not long ago. Roselia understood. In the original story, Abel met the heroine in the market a month later. He had projected his late wife onto her because of the resemblance. The wig confirmed her theory. Erlin studied Roselia's face carefully, then touched her own hair and murmured that her real mother had beautiful blue eyes. She asked her father when her mother would return. Abel's expression shattered. The air felt unbearably heavy. Roselia realized she had reopened a wound. She told him it was understandable. Abel asked why she had come. She replied that she wished to buy his painting. Surprised, he invited her inside. In the modest cottage, she sat at a small table and accepted tea. Her gaze drifted repeatedly to the painting of a woman and child illuminated by light. Abel noticed her interest. He asked about Antonio. She calmly said he was her older brother, relieved he did not suspect they were the same person. Abel confessed that the painting was his final work. After completing it, he stopped painting and stopped going outside. He had trapped himself inside that canvas. But earlier, when he saw Erlin mistake a stranger for her mother, he realized he was not the only one drowning. His daughter was suffering even more. He called himself foolish. It was just a painting. He decided to sell it, use the money to buy Erlin proper clothes, and raise her well. That would have been his wife's wish. He thanked both Antonio and the lady for helping him regain his senses. Roselia lowered her eyes. Even without her, he would have eventually recovered after meeting the lady in the market. The story would have moved forward. Still, she guaranteed one thing with quiet certainty. His work would soon be recognized. When he questioned her confidence, she answered steadily that the piece was extraordinary. People would see its value. He would become a renowned artist supported by the royal family and continue creating masterpieces. This moment was not an ending. It was the true beginning. Later, Roselia walked through Algrisha, clutching the wrapped painting to her chest. Relief settled in. Buying it had been the right choice. She turned a corner and slammed into someone solid. The impact threw her to the ground. The painting slipped from her hands. She apologized quickly, head lowered, admitting she had been distracted. A calm voice asked if she was hurt. She looked up. Duke Klaus stood over her. Her face drained of color. He asked again if she was all right. Alejandro and another aide watched confused. When asked if he knew her, Klaus gave a vague reply. Panic surged. Of all times, she had to meet him now. She snatched up the painting and lifted it to cover her face. He questioned the strange behavior and stepped closer, offering help if she was injured. Before his hand could reach her, she shouted that she was fine and bolted. She ran at full speed, leaving the men staring after her. Alejandro muttered in confusion. Klaus kept watching the direction she fled, uneasy. He dismissed the feeling, saying her eyes merely reminded him of someone. Later, back at the Duke's mansion, Roselia had changed into Antonio's clothes. She peeked into the hallway. Servants moved as usual. Nothing seemed out of place. She walked forward, frustrated by her luck. The thought of him recognizing her made her stomach twist. A voice sounded behind her. Klaus, he asked if Antonio needed something. She jumped and denied it immediately. He replied that he, however, had business with Antonio. He opened his office door and ordered him inside. In the office, Klaus brought up Antonio's younger sister, Roselia de Hessink. He confirmed that Antonio had reported her dead. Shock flashed across her face. She asked why he was bringing it up. He said he had met someone earlier who looked exactly like him. Then he mentioned something else. A scent. The same scent as that woman. He stepped closer, trying to identify it. She forced ignorance. He straightened and asked directly if Roselia de Hessink was truly dead. His stare sharpened. He warned Antonio to answer honestly. If he had falsely reported her death and hidden her, there would be consequences. Realization struck. He did not suspect Antonio was a woman. woman. He suspected Antonio was hiding a living sister. She steadied herself. Yes, Roselia was dead. Inside, she remembered the original story cold, calculating. The Duke had used Roselia's love and discarded her. The memory of the guillotine flashed in her mind. She looked up and told him he was being unreasonable. That was not something to say to a grieving brother. Then she delivered the final blow. They were not blood-related. Their mother had remarried and brought Roselia into the family. There was no blood tie, no reason for resemblance. Klaus paused. The logic settled. He admitted he might have misunderstood. He apologized and dismissed Antonio. She bowed and left. Inside, Klaus murmured that if this were all an act, it was impressive. He touched his face, wondering if he had grown overly sensitive because of the scent. Outside, Roselia leaned against the closed door and exhaled hard. The hallway was silent. She walked a few steps away, then collapsed onto her knees in an empty corner. She mocked his word, consequences, under her breath. Still shaking, she reaffirmed her choice. Faking her death had been the right move. Roselia unveiled the painting with a triumphant smile, thinking that now she only needed to sell it. However, her confidence waned during the carriage ride as she fell into deep thought, wondering how a mere servant could possibly show the artwork to the crown princess. Lady Closet noticed his distress and asked why he looked so worried when he was supposed to be the most handsome person attending the event. Roselia feigned vulnerability, admitting that to repay his debt, he needed to meet Her Highness the Crown Princess. Closet immediately dismissed the concern, assuring him that it was nothing difficult. Closet asked if Antonio knew the location of the tea party, revealing it was being held at the Marquisate, the Crown Princess's family home. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by Aquilia de Herden, the princess's younger sister. The noblewomen present admired Antonio's handsome looks and manual skills, but Lady Juza de Belmont scoffed from the side. She criticized him for being too frail to serve properly, remarking that a man should be manly and that he looked like he would break at a slight touch. Roselia approached the hostile noblewoman with a polite smile. She asked if she could fix Lady Juzid's hair, catching the woman off guard. Roselia internally noted that people who scolded others often craved affection the most. She complimented Juzid's face shape, suggesting that an updo would make her features stand out. Juzid blushed and stammered but allowed him to try it. The other ladies watched in awe as Antonio handled the difficult woman with ease. As Roselia skillfully styled the hair, Closet boasted that Antonio also possessed an excellent sense of aesthetics, lying that even the cold Duke Balthazar acknowledged his artistic eye. Seizing the opening, Aquilia mentioned that the crown princess was also very interested in painting and had been inviting artists to the palace, though she hadn't found any works she particularly liked. She suggested that perhaps they should show the princess the painting Antonio had seen. Closet agreed enthusiastically and Roselia gave a discreet thumbs up, thrilled that her plan to reach the princess was working perfectly. Later, Roselia arrived at the imperial palace, clutching the wrapped painting nervously. A maid announced the arrival of Duke Balthazar's servant. Roselia entered and bowed deeply before the crown princess, Ivalian de Lugbelzit. Roselia was internally struck by Ivalian's radiance, confirming she was indeed the beautiful heroine of the story. Ivalian welcomed him warmly, mentioning that Closet had praised him and that she was curious about the painting. Roselia unveiled the canvas for the princess. Ivalian stared at the artwork in silence for a long moment, causing Roselia to sweat with anxiety over the lack of response. Finally, the princess spoke softly, describing the painting as truly warm and stating that she could feel the emotions of the woman depicted. She asked for the artist's name, and Roselia proudly credited Abel Huntum. Ivalian thanked him for introducing such a great painting and then made a request. She explained that she was not free to move around outside the palace, which made it difficult to find the art she truly wanted. Trusting Antonio's eye, she asked if he would find and show her excellent pieces in the future in exchange for fair payment. Roselia agreed immediately, honored by the request. Ivalian then moved to settle the payment for the current piece. As the princess wrote the check, Roselia clenched her fist in victory, celebrating that the transaction was complete and that she knew the crown princess's taste perfectly. Roselia lowered her gaze to the check resting in her hands. Shock flushed across her face. For a second she wondered if she had misread it. She pointed out the excess. The crown princess calmly explained that the amount was intentional. It covered the painting and additional money meant personally for Antonio. The artist's sponsorship would be handled separately, and she expected Antonio to deliver it. The door opened without warning. A maid announced the arrival of the crown prince. Esteban Vandeloop de Lugbelzit entered with heavy steps, radiant blonde hair, sharp golden eyes, an oppressive presence that filled the room. Roselia recognized him instantly, the heroine's tormentor, the man whose suspicion and pride destroyed everything before regret ever surfaced. His gaze passed over Antonio with disdain before fixing on the crown princess. He questioned why the duke's servant had been summoned. His tone suggested scheme rather than curiosity. In the original story, Duke Klaus of Balthasar and the princess had once been inseparable childhood friends. The crown prince's emergence and political marriage fractured that closeness. By this point in the timeline, distrust ruled all three of them. The prince pressed further. The princess stated she had only inquired about Closet's well-being. He stepped closer and seized her wrist. Suspicion sharpened into accusation. He suggested her Marquis family and the duke's house were plotting behind his back. The princess raised her voice in anger. He mocked her reaction as proof of guilt. Roselia's heart pounded. This was unfolding exactly as written. written, doubt piling onto misunderstanding. The prince tightened his grip. The princess glared back and accused him of driving her toward despair like her late mother. She declared she was not weak. Roselia knew what scene followed in the novel. Klaus would appear. Everything would escalate. Before she could stop herself, she intervened. A gloved hand suddenly caught the crown prince's wrist. Duke Klaus stood there, expression cold, voice low. The prince smirked at the timing, amused. He twisted the image of Duke and princess standing together, implying scandal, framing himself as the outsider. The princess finally tore her arm free and issued a warning. If this continued, she would refuse to attend the upcoming diplomatic event. The threat landed. The prince stepped back. His tone shifted to detached indifference. He stated that her absence would become a serious political matter. Before leaving, he warned Klaus that crossing his path again would bring consequences to the duke's family. Klaus immediately asked if the prince still treated her so carelessly. The princess turned away and stated it was a private matter. Distance reasserted itself. Klaus then noticed Antonio's presence and questioned why he was there. Roselia stiffened. The princess quickly explained that she had called him regarding closet. She concealed her art dealings. Klaus appeared to accept the explanation, though displeasure lingered in his gaze. He curtly asked whether Antonio intended to leave only upon command. Roselia bowed and withdrew without delay. Once outside, she moved quickly down the corridor, frustration simmering. She had not chosen to witness their conflict, yet she had been dragged into it. Klaus's cold authority irritated her despite herself. A voice stopped her. The crown prince stepped out from behind a pillar, blocking her path. Her pulse spiked. He asked where she thought she was going. She forced a bright servant smile despite exhaustion clawing at her nerves. He asked if she valued her life. He referred to her as Balthazar's dog and stated he had questions. The smile on her face strained. He glanced around to confirm they were alone. The crown prince grabbed Roselia by the collar without warning. She staggered as he dragged her down the corridor, shoes scraping against stone. She tried to pry his hand loose, but he ignored her and scanned the palace grounds, searching for somewhere hidden. He pulled her into a deserted garden and slammed her against a stone wall. Pain shot through her back. He trapped her there with one arm braced beside her head. Satisfied they were alone, he demanded to know what Duke Klaus had ordered her to do, whether she was spying. He promised to spare her life if she spoke honestly. Fear froze her. She had done nothing but deliver a painting. Her silence darkened his expression. He assumed she was refusing. She quickly begged for mercy. Then his tone changed. He offered money, double what she received. Her eyes flickered. Debt pressed heavily on her mind. He raised it to triple. Temptation surged for a split second. Selling the Duke out would be easy. Freedom was within reach. She suppressed it and insisted she had only run an errand. Nothing more. He searched her face and asked if it was true. She nodded firmly. She did not dare construct a complicated lie. His gaze dropped to her wrist. He grabbed it and frowned. It was too thin. He examined her more carefully. Too short. Too slender. Not built like a man. Suspicion sharpened in his golden eyes. He leaned closer and demanded her name. Still gripping her wrist, waiting for her answer. Steel hung above her neck. Not a dream. A memory from the novel. Roselia kneeling, wrists bound. The crown prince watching without emotion. A charge fabricated under Duke Klaus's name. A brief plea. The blade falling. Blood across white stone. The image snapped apart. She was in the garden again, breath uneven. The crown prince still holding her wrist, eyes sharp as if he could peel away skin and see the truth underneath. He asked her name. She forced calm and gave the only one she could, Antonio. He repeated it slowly, gaze dragging over her thin frame. Too small. Too pale. Not built like a man, she answered without pause. Poor upbringing. Stunted growth. Sensitive topic. Silence stretched. Then he released her with visible disinterest and told her to leave. She bowed properly. Walked, not hurried. Only when she turned the corner did her fingers curl tight. She would not die that way. Later she placed a thick envelope on Klaus's desk. Twice the promised amount. Payment earned from the crown princess. He counted it once. No praise. No surprise. Only one question. Why did you go to her? She said she was clearing her debt. His gaze hardened. He told her not to give shallow answers. The crown princess was not someone to approach lightly. What was her real intention? She met his stare evenly. However she earned money was her choice. In the end he only required repayment. His jaw set. He rose and seized her collar, anger flashing. He warned her not to cross lines. Not to drag that person into schemes. She did not struggle. She said clearly she would never harm the crown princess. Once the debt was gone, she would disappear quietly. For a second, something uncertain flickered in his eyes. He released her. She straightened her clothes and left without another word. Inside, resentment settled deep. In the story he had used Roselia as a disposable pawn. Now he acted protective. She would remember that. Days later, inside a boutique bright with silk and perfume, Closet held up masks one after another. Antonio rejected each flatly. Closet narrowed her eyes and said he looked like a young master burdened with debt and pride. Accurate. She guessed Klaus had scolded him again, told him not to take it to heart. Whenever the crown princess was involved, Klaus lost balance. Antonio stayed silent. Closet lifted a deep purple mask and said when shoes step in mud they should be cleaned, not thrown away. He called her unexpectedly perceptive. She pressed the mask toward his face. He refused. It was designed for women. Then wear the dress too, she said. Absolutely not. She complained about wasted beauty and dragged the seamstress into agreement. 2 against 1. He endured their pleading longer than expected, then finally disappeared behind the curtain. Minutes later, a blonde woman stepped out in a soft pink dress. The room fell quiet. Roselia, still hiding behind the name Antonio, touched her chest slowly, breath leaving her lungs. Closet and Melda could only stare. Roselia stood rigid in a pink dress and mask, roses surrounding her. Swake gathered under the wig. She asked if it was enough. Closet and Melda stared. Awe turned into noisy excitement. Closet circled her, lamenting that Antonio had not been born a lady. She spoke of summoning an artist to preserve this sight. Her fingers tugged at the blonde wig, criticizing the color and saying black hair would suit better. Roselia's stomach tightened. Her real hair was black. More masks and ornaments were thrown at her. Closet pushed her to try each one. Roselia questioned the sudden excess. Closet reminded her that her birthday approached. The theme was a masquerade ball. An invitation had already been sent to the crown princess. Antonio would attend. Roselia assumed she meant as a servant. Closet rejected that instantly. As her guest, Roselia protested. She was officially a servant. It would look improper. Closet dismissed the concern. A mask erased identity. Melda nodded eagerly. Roselia tried to at least change out of the dress first. They ignored her, already planning fabrics and colors. Later, back in male attire, Roselia cautiously asked if her current clothes would suffice. Closet reacted sharply. If he was attending as her partner, he required a proper suit. Maids were summoned. Measuring tape wrapped around Roselia's shoulders and waist. Laughter filled the room. Roselia felt trapped. Alejandro entered and announced a gift from the Duke. A jewelry box was presented. Inside lay a bracelet. Roselia blinked in surprise. Closet's excitement dimmed. Receiving it early meant he would be busy again. She revealed the party marked both her birthday and her debutante ball. Roselia asked whether the Duke would attend. Closet dismissed the idea. Klaus cared for work and money. He never appeared for birthdays or even their parents' death anniversaries. In his office, Klaus sat buried under documents. He paused, recalling Antonio telling him not to misunderstand and overcomplicate matters. A knock followed. Antonio entered. Klaus allowed it, watching closely. Roselia felt the memory of his grip at her collar days ago, heat rising in her chest. Klaus asked if she would remain silent. She delivered Closet's thanks for the gift. He acknowledged it. She placed a box on his desk. Inside was a black mask. She explained the masquerade theme, suggesting he might not know. Klaus stated he knew. It was the largest expense in the ducal budget this year. She asked if he would attend. He gestured to the towering paperwork. He would not rearrange duties for a mere birthday party. Roselia pressed on. It was not merely a birthday. It was a debutante ball. Nobles would judge alliances by attendance. Closet would not admit it. But she must be hurt. Klaus's expression hardened. He questioned what a servant of 1 month understood. He insisted he fulfilled obligations by providing the finest things. That was all he could do. Roselia looked at him steadily. Not enough. She reminded him that after their parents' deaths, only the 2 of them remained. To Closet, he was everything. His face darkened at the mention of family. The air turned sharp. He cut her off and ordered her out. She bowed, apologized for taking his time, and left filled the office. Klaus pressed his fingers to his temples. His gaze dropped to the masquerade mask resting in the open box. The memory resurfaced, Antonio calling him arrogant. The word lingered, sharp and unwelcome. A subordinate entered and requested to report. He approached with visible hesitation and handed over documents regarding Baron Hessink's family, insisting the Duke read them himself. Klaus scanned the page. The death certificate of Baron Hessink's daughter had been forged. Roselia de Hessink was not officially dead. His eyes sharpened. Suspicion settled into certainty. Antonio was hiding something far greater than expected. The ballroom of the Balthazar estate blazed with golden light and roses. Closet stood at the center in a white gown and mask. Guests praised the scale of the celebration. Antonio remained at her side, masked and composed. Lady Juside Belmont observed the grandeur, impressed. She approached with her older brother in military uniform and offered congratulations. When introduced, the brother's attention shifted immediately to Antonio. He mistook her for the Duke and eagerly grasped her hand, commenting on her smaller build compared to rumors. Antonio faltered. Closet intervened at once, clarifying that Antonio was her partner. The brother laughed off the mistake and asked when the Duke would arrive. Juside scolded him, but he continued, suggesting the Duke was too busy for such a party. The words stung. Closet's expression tightened despite her smile. Whispers spread among nearby nobles. Rumors about strained siblings resurfaced. Concern over the Duke's absence grew. Antonio's anger simmered. Then she noticed movement at the top of the staircase. The announcer's voice cut through the murmurs. Duke Klaus had arrived. Gasps rippled across the hall as he descended in a dark cape and black mask. He approached Closet and offered a belated birthday acknowledgement for her 15th year. Closet stared, stunned. The Belmont brother intruded immediately, addressing Klaus familiarly and drawing a sharp look. He introduced himself and Juside, praising the Duke's imposing presence. Antonia watched in disbelief. She had not expected him to come. Doubt flickered. Had her earlier words reached him? The brother grew overly excited and reached toward Klaus, declaring he had a question. Antonio stepped between them without hesitation, blocking contact. The brother shifted to rambling about swordsmanship. Behind her, Closet glowed with pride. Juside watched that expression, jealousy tightening her face. face. Irritation deepened as she scanned the room. Her gaze settled on Antonio walking slightly away from the center. A slow smirk formed as a plan began to take shape. Juicide lifted her glass and offered a toast to Antonio, a smirk hidden beneath her mask. They drank. Her gaze lingered, sharp and calculating. Her thoughts were fixed on Closet. She would take what Closet treasured most. Roselia sensed the shift but kept her composure. Juicide claimed she felt lonely and asked about the brother Antonio had arrived with. She suggested they speak somewhere quiet. Roselia questioned the need, then glanced toward the ballroom's center. Closet stood beside Klaus, smiling in a way Roselia had never seen before, genuine, unguarded. Roselia decided that moment should not be ruined. Removing a potential disturbance was safer. She agreed. Juicide led her down the corridor. Satisfaction in every step. They entered a private room. Roselia stayed near the door and asked what Juicide wanted. Juicide sat and told her to sit. Roselia hesitated. Juicide reminded her that tonight she was a guest, not a servant. Reluctantly, Roselia sat at the edge of the sofa and made it clear she would not stay long. She reminded Juicide she was Closet's partner. Juicide acknowledged it, saying a moment was enough. Back in the ballroom, Closet noticed Antonio was missing. Klaus informed her that Antonio had gone somewhere with Juicide. Closet stiffened. Klaus questioned her reaction. She fell silent. In the private room, Juicide poured more wine and confessed sudden affection. Recalling the day Antonio styled her hair, Roselia laughed awkwardly, unsure how to respond. Juicide pressed her for an answer. Roselia remained silent. She stood to leave. Wine splashed across her shirt. Juicide moved to wipe it. Roselia refused and tried to step back. Juicide gripped her arm. Heat surged through Roselia's body. Dizziness followed. Her vision blurred. Her pulse pounded erratically. She staggered and collapsed onto the sofa, confusion turning into alarm. Juicide leaned over her, asking if she felt hot, if she had a fever. She forced Roselia back down when she tried to rise. Her limbs would not respond. Realization struck. The wine had been drugged. Juicide dropped all pretense. She admitted she had always despised Closet, calling her arrogant and privileged. Her fingers traced Roselia's masked face. She mocked her as something Closet possessed and wondered what expression Closet would make once that possession was ruined. Roselia tried to speak. Her tongue felt heavy. Panic tore through her. She was a woman. If this continued, her secret would be exposed. Her body would not obey. Juicide began unfastening her shirt. Terror spiked as fabric loosened. The doors burst open. Closet stood in the doorway, fury radiating from her. Juicide froze. Roselia lay weak and unfocused. Juicide demanded to know why she had entered. Closet said nothing. She strode forward and kicked Juicide hard, sending her crashing to the floor. Juicide cried out in shock. Closet stood over her, trembling with rage. Roselia's vision dimmed. Sound blurred. She heard her name through the haze. Darkness closed in. When her eyes opened again, Closet hovered above her, fury replaced by concern. The mask was gone. Cool air touched her exposed face. He sat up, pressing a hand to his pounding forehead. Fragments returned. The wine. The private room. Juicide's hand on him. This was not that room. He was in a lavish bedroom. Alarm sharpened his voice as he asked about Juicide. Closet stated calmly that she had scolded her and thrown her out. Melda stood behind her, unusually quiet. Antonio sensed something wrong in their expressions. A cold weight settled in his stomach. He looked down. He was wearing a loose white nightgown. Shock jolted through him. He demanded to know where his clothes were. Closet pointed to a chair. They had been wet, so they changed him. His pulse spiked. If they changed him, they had seen his body. He asked directly. Closet did not deny it. Melda's silence confirmed everything. Humiliation burned through him. The bindings were gone. The truth, that Roselia was disguised as her brother Antonio, was exposed. He searched Closet's face for anger. None appeared. She admitted she had been surprised, but it changed nothing. Antonio was still Antonio to her. Whether he was a woman or a man did not matter. The words left him stunned. She added that she had secretly hoped Antonio was a woman. It made things easier. Emotion tightened his throat. He thanked her and attempted to apologize for the deception. Closet interrupted, assuming it was related to family or debt. She promised to keep the secret from Claus. Melda agreed without hesitation. Gratitude steadied him. Closet suddenly brightened. She had prepared a dress just in case. Back in the ballroom, Klaus scanned the crowd. Closet had gone to find Antonio and had not returned. The Belmont brother continued talking beside him, unaware of his impatience. Klaus looked up and stopped. Closet had returned, holding the hand of an elegant woman in a blue dress and green mask. His gaze sharpened. Behind the mask, Roselia felt it immediately. His eyes lingered too long. Her pulse quickened. Closet kept hold of her hand and guided her forward. Heavy footsteps echoed. The royal couple arrived. The crown prince in a black mask and military uniform. The crown princess radiant in pink. The crowd bowed. Klaus approached Closet at once, asking where she had been and what happened to Antonio. Closet answered smoothly that he felt unwell and went inside. Klaus's eyes narrowed. They shifted past her to the masked woman in blue. Roselia stilled, fingers tightening against her skirt, forcing her breathing to remain even. Klaus held the gaze a moment longer before turning to greet the crown prince and crown princess formally. Everyone bowed. Closet stepped forward and curtsied before the royal couple, every movement precise. She welcomed them despite their busy schedule. The crown prince took her hands with polished warmth and stated her birthday was reason enough to attend. She smiled, playing the perfect hostess. He turned to Klaus and offered thanks for a previous matter. Klaus answered with silence and an unrateable stare. The royal's arrival drew attention away. She decided to use the distraction and slip out quietly. She moved through the guests and collided with someone solid, the crown prince. He looked down at her with faint amusement. Behind him, Klaus's gaze sharpened. Closet stiffened. Roselia greeted him formally. He dismissed the distance between them and stepped closer, reminding her this was not their first meeting. She feigned confusion. He brushed it aside and seized her hand. He pulled her onto the dance floor. Music swelled. She had no choice but to follow his lead. He leaned close, voice low, ordering quiet cooperation. He spun her, framing the movement as if she were the one causing impropriety by leaving the crown princess unattended. Whispers spread. Guests questioned the identity of the masked lady dancing first with the prince. The crown princess stood nearby with Klaus. Klaus's expression darkened. The prince's grip tightened around Roselia's wrist. He commented on how thin it was. Then he revealed it. Klaus did not know she was a woman. Her breath faltered. He offered a bargain. Help him once more and he would stay silent. Before she could refuse, he drew her close. His face lowered to hers, close enough to mimic a kiss. From a distance, it looked intimate. Shock rippled across the floor. Closet stared. The crown princess stiffened. Klaus's eyes burned. The prince held the pose deliberately, then released her with a satisfied look. He acknowledged the debt between them. A violent presence approached. Klaus crossed the floor, fury contained but visible. The prince blocked him, warning that such an approach would frighten the lady. He taunted him. Klaus ordered him aside. The prince refused. Tension sparked between them. Roselia did not wait. She turned and ran. Voices called out behind her. She fled the ballroom, one heel slipping free. She did not stop. She ran through corridors and out into the garden. She dove into the bushes, breath ragged, heart pounding. Silence. Then branches parted. Klaus stood over her. He remarked on her escape skills, unimpressed. Then he said her name. Roselia de Hessink. Cold dread spread through her. He stated he had re-investigated her death certificate. It was forged. Officials had failed, but the truth was clear. He believed Antonio had hidden his sister's survival. Roselia forced herself upright. He asked whether she had been in contact with her brother all along. Realizing he still believed they were two separate people, she protected the disguise. She asked him to leave Antonio out of it. Klaus assumed the siblings had deceived him together. Now that the truth was exposed, he suggested both repay the family debt at the ducal estate. She apologized for deceiving him but refused to work as two people. She declared she was already contributing to the debt. If he feared she would flee, she would appear in place of Antonio at the next settlement. Silence settled in the moonlit garden. Klaus studied her posture, her tone, her defiance. Something aligned, though not blood-related. The resemblance between Roselia and Antonio, the way they spoke, the way they stood, felt identical. He looked closer. The similarity was no longer vague. Before the thought could fully form, Closet's voice rang through the garden. She came running toward them. Closet checked Roselia in panic, Roselia breathing unevenly. Klaus stood over them, eyes fixed on her. He said he had wondered how she managed to enter the ducal banquet, but now it made sense. She and Closet had both hidden things from him. He stated that as long as the debt was repaid, there would be no issue. Even so, Closet had deceived him as well. His gaze returned to Roselia. He told her he would see her at the next settlement. Then he turned and left the garden without hesitation, admitting she should have listened and not forced Roselia into this. Roselia slowly stood and said it was fine. Her identity had not been completely exposed. Still, the situation had grown dangerous. Closet laughed softly and called her brother a fool, sharp in everything else yet blind in this matter. Roselia forced a small smile. Closet urged her to return before anyone noticed. Before parting, she asked how Roselia knew the crown prince. Since they had looked close while dancing, Roselia denied any connection and claimed it was coincidence. Closet warned her to be careful. Klaus moved quietly and acted without warning. The next day at a tavern, Roselia sat disguised as Antonio. Resting his chin on his hand, he regretted promising to attend the next settlement in Roselia's place. Managing both herself and her brother's identity would be exhausting. She needed to secure the next painting quickly. A waitress approached. When Antonio looked up, he noticed dried paint on her fingertips. His expression sharpened. Nadia Erlos, the artist behind the Crown Princess's second collection. He ordered beer. She offered food. He declined. He casually asked her name. She grew suspicious and asked why. He replied lightly that he intended to leave a tip. A voice from the back called for Nadia, confirming her identity. As Antonio prepared to introduce himself, Nadia's face went pale. She turned and ran without explanation. Antonio stood in shock, watching her disappear. He could not understand what had frightened her. Later, in the Duchy of Balthazar, Antonio walked down the corridor in silence, replaying the failed encounter. Lost in thought, he collided with someone. Klaus. Antonio stiffened. Klaus looked down and remarked that guilt made people easily startled. Antonio defended himself, insisting he was repaying the debt faithfully. Klaus asked whether he had received the message. Then he spoke directly. Antonio's sister, who was supposed to be dead, had appeared alive at the banquet. The death certificate had been re-examined. It was forged. He questioned how Antonio dared to deceive him. Antonio felt cornered but pleaded that he had no choice at the time and would accept punishment now. Klaus said his name and fell silent. He turned away, covering his mouth as if conflicted. unexpected. The pause stretched. Then he faced him again. He thanked him. Antonio froze in confusion. Klaus clarified that he meant closet. At the banquet, she had called him older brother. He could not remember the last time she used that word. Antonio had helped her prepare for the debutante and told him what truly mattered to her. Klaus repeated his thanks with rare sincerity. Antonio stood still, unsure whether to feel relieved or more afraid. The town square was crowded under a bright sky. Roselia moved through it in a simple green dress, playing the role of Antonio's sister. Her thoughts lingered on Klaus. He had forgiven the deception once and warned that there would not be a second time. Gratitude from him had been unexpected. She still could not decide whether it meant mercy or calculation. Someone crashed into her shoulder. A familiar face. Nadia. Nadia rushed toward a small shop and begged the owner to let her return to work. She said she desperately needed the job. The shopkeeper refused, accusing her of disappearing without a word. He said he had taken her in out of pity and would not tolerate irresponsibility. Then he slammed the door, leaving her outside. Nadia coughed and lowered her head. Roselia watched. Nadia noticed and snapped, asking if she had been eavesdropping. Roselia denied it. Nadia turned to leave. Roselia followed and apologized again. Nadia told her to mind her own business. Roselia hesitated but persisted. She said she was worried. Internally, she noted that yesterday, when she had approached as Antonio, Nadia had run immediately. Now she stayed. Dressing as a woman had been the correct choice. Roselia lightly caught her arm. Nadia froze. Two men blocked the narrow alley behind them. One wore an eye patch. He called Nadia by name and mocked her attempt to hide. Both held knives. The space tightened. Roselia asked who they were. Nadia trembled. Roselia realized the truth and asked under her breath if she had borrowed from loan sharks. No answer. The men finally acknowledged Roselia. She instantly pushed Nadia aside and claimed they were strangers. The eye patch man laughed. He grabbed Nadia and pressed a blade close. He said that was even better. No one would search for a random girl. Selling too was profitable. Roselia's heart pounded. Whether this incident existed in the original story no longer mattered. Survival did. A memory surfaced. Simple self-defense steps she had once watched on her phone in another life. Inhale. She drew in a sharp breath and screamed at full volume. The sound echoed through the alley. The men flinched in surprise. She kept shouting for help, trying to disorient them. One thug lunged to silence her. She stepped forward instead of back. She shifted her weight, raised her hands in front of her chest, and drove her palm hard into his throat and upper chest. The impact threw him off balance. He crashed onto the stones. She seized Nadia's hand and ran. Nadia stumbled, exhausted. Heavy footsteps closed in. The fallen thug recovered faster than expected. A hand caught Roselia's wrist and yanked her backward. The knife lifted again. Duke Klaus Balthazar storms into the warehouse and drives his foot into a thug's chest. The man flies back, slams against the floor, goes still. Klaus lands steady, coat settling, gaze cold. Another thug groans at his feet. Roselia freezes, shock flashes across her face as she recognizes him. He looks down at her, unimpressed, as if this chaos is expected wherever she stands. A thug lunges from behind. Klaus shifts without hesitation, catches the arm, twists. Bone strains. The attacker drops. Klaus releases him like discarded weight. Roselia watches, pulse racing. Forced to admit his precision, Nadia grabs Roselia's hand. They run while Klaus handles the rest. Footsteps pound over dirt and stone. They duck behind stacked crates, bend over, breath tearing from their lungs. Roselia studies Nadia, confused. Nadia admits she ran on instinct. A coughing fit cuts her off. Her body shakes. Roselia reaches for her, alarm rising. Nadia straightens, wipes her mouth, insists she is fine. She confirms Roselia's name and says she owes her despite just meeting. Her eyes linger with strange intensity. She asks Roselia to follow. They move through narrow streets and stop before a crumbling house. Inside, darkness, cobwebs, faint firelight. Nadia apologizes for the state of it. She insists on repaying the help. Roselia tries to refuse. Nadia's pride surfaces. She makes her sit. Roselia scans the room. Poverty worse than expected. Nadia brings out a framed canvas. Says it is all she can give. Nothing special. Roselia looks. Light seems to spill from the paint. Colors layered with impossible depth. Recognition strikes. The second collection of the Crown Princess. The piece feels alive, pulling at her mind. Nadia coughs again, says it is her last painting. Roselia's chest tightens. She understands. Nadia Erlos. Talent that dies before recognition. Illness carving time short. Nadia admits she has no money left, not even for paint. No doctor. Debt collectors hunting her. She rejects pity. Says she never expected long life. Roselia asks about selling the works. Nadia looks at empty shelves. She never painted to sell. Painting was escape. When sick and abandoned, art was freedom. She sold everything else but not that. She hands the canvas over, awkward, almost embarrassed by her own honesty. Tells Roselia to take it if useful. Roselia realizes the weight in her hands is not just art. It is Nadia's freedom, her last defiance. She thanks her. Nadia turns away, warns her not to return to this part of town if she wants to avoid ugliness. A faint smile betrays her. Roselia leaves with the canvas. Decision hardens. Treatment now could still save her. At the Crown Princess's palace, a servant announces a representative from the Duchy of Balthazar. Roselia stands as Antonio, posture lowered, painting wrapped in cloth. Crown Princess Ivlian greets him calmly. Mentions his early departure from Closet's banquet. Mentions seeing Roselia there. Sweat gathers at his temple. He confirms stiffly. The princess's tone shifts. Rumors spread that the crown prince showed interest in Roselia. Antonio goes rigid. The painting feels heavier in his arms. Inside, frustration burns. Outside, restraint. She steps closer. Because of that night, she has a request. She wants a meeting with Roselia. Panic jolts through him. She assures him it is not interrogation. She states her position clearly. Future Empress of Lug Belzet. Duty to stand beside Emperor Esteban and protect the nation. Then the truth beneath her composure. The crown prince has not settled his heart. He keeps his distance just as he did at the banquet. Antonio stands still, listening. He notes her clarity. She sees the political balance exactly. She explains that opposing forces are waiting. Instability around the crown prince threatens the imperial family. She cannot allow weakness. She pauses, then states her decision. Roselia should become the crown prince's concubine. Shock hits him. His eyes widen. The proposal feels unreal. She continues. Roselia would not be empress but would gain wealth and honor. He reacts at once, almost refusing before correcting himself. Roselia would refuse. She is uneducated. Despite a barren title, she remains a commoner. The princess counters calmly. Education can be arranged. Past emperors accepted commoner concubines. Silence stretches. He asks if this is not excessive even for the nation. Inside, he acknowledges her resolve. Her sense of duty has always been firm. He respected that. Yet hesitation grows. Outwardly, he bows. He understands her reasoning. It is not a bad proposal. Then he tightens his grip on the painting. He has one question. She asks what it is. He meets her gaze. Is this the crown princess's judgment alone, or Evelian's own belief? He has admired her. He has also pitied her. She calls it a strange question. She can the crown princess are the same. She cannot imagine herself without the title. Whether Evelian or crown princess, nothing changes. He closes his eyes, taking in her answer. He speaks of himself instead. Called a servant of the duke's family. Sometimes a fallen noble. Known as Antonio. Known as Roselia. He touches the painting. Names are shells. Not the true self. A vow he repeats inwardly. He will not forget who he is. She watches, startled by his steadiness. He asks again. Not as crown princess. What does Evelian feel? She stands silent before the covered painting. Slowly she acknowledges her feelings. Toward Esteban. She feels disappointment. Loneliness in the palace. Painting became her solace. She never asked for much. Only respect as a partner. A companion to shape the empire together. Her fingers brush the canvas. Perhaps the artist felt the same. The work is beautiful yet filled with solitude. He observes her. Evelian and Nadia. Different lives, same surrender. Women who gave everything and lost themselves. He says he is glad she likes the painting. The image of the sky within it lingers. Vast, radiant, distant. Perhaps Nadia longs for it. Perhaps Evelian. Perhaps he does too. He reveals the title, Freedom. She thanks him with a small smile. Later, a knock sounds at Nadia's house. Inside, coughing. She asks who it is. Roselia answers. The door opens. Nadia scolds her for returning, then stops. Her gaze drops to the fine dress, lifts to the workers behind her. Roselia stands composed, surrounded by laborers carrying supplies. She reminds Nadia she would return. She takes control immediately. The window must be fixed first. Workers move, hauling timber and sacks. A doctor examines Nadia, asking about the duration of symptoms. Nadia looks lost, overwhelmed. Roselia announces she comes under orders of the crown princess. Nadia falters at the title. She explains that the princess was moved by the artwork and decided to sponsor her so she can continue painting. Nadia stands speechless. Roselia opens a wooden box. Fine paints inside, hands it to her. She recalls Nadia's words about protecting painting. Now she will not lose it again. Nadia sobs, clutching the wooden box to her chest. Tears stream down her face as gratitude overwhelms her. Her shoulders shake, voice breaking as she thanks Roselia again and again. Workers repair the house. Later, in a busy tavern, ladders scrape against walls. Roselia and Nadia sit with drinks. Nadia stares into her mug, loneliness surfacing. She asks if Roselia will visit often, admits she gets lonely. Roselia smiles without hesitation and agrees. She adds one condition. Nadia must take her medicine properly. As they sit together, Roselia reflects. The original story has already shifted. If the main plot can change, Nadia's fate can change too. That afternoon, Roselia stands before the doors of the Balthazar estate. She steadies herself. She remembers her promise in the garden. If he feared she would run, she would deliver the next payment herself. Regret flickers. She questions why she made that promise. She knocks and enters. Sunlight fills the office. Duke Klaus stands by the window. She announces herself. He turns slightly and tells her to come in. His gaze drops to her dress, the same one from the party. He mocks the repetition, suggesting she is either poor or careless about hiding her identity. She forces a laugh, says she must save every coin to repay her debts. Inside, irritation burns. He accuses her of running away again in the garden. Sweet forms at her temple. She explains she left because her companion was ill and thanks him for the help. He steps closer, questions her recent behavior. One day at a noble party, the next chased by thugs. He tells her to stop being stubborn and return to the estate. Her resolve hardens. His pressure changes nothing. She prefers her current life. He challenges that word. Comfortable. How much more suffering will she endure when he offers protection? She cuts him off. She does not understand his concern. She can handle her own affairs. The air tightens. He notes her temper mirrors her brother's. He leans closer, telling her to stop being stubborn. The same sweet scent reaches him again. It unsettles him. She places the sealed envelope on the table. Partial payment. She thanks him for his help but reminds him he has no right to control her life. She Claw's money, nothing more. He loses composure, questions her pride, suggests she is rejecting him to provoke pursuit, asks how much he must offer. Her patience snaps, her hand strikes his cheek. The sound echoes. A red mark blooms. She states that future communication will go through Antonio. She refuses to face such situations again. She turns and leaves, door slamming behind her. Alone, he touches his cheek. Shame replaces anger. He calls himself a fool. His rationality collapses whenever those siblings are involved. Frustration lingers. Later, she sits as Antonio on the edge of a bed, drained. Closet bursts in, energetic, wanting to play. She notices his dark mood and asks what happened. He brushes it off. Tension still visible. Closet presents a tray of decorated cookies, excited to share. She urges him to eat. He stares at them, still replaying the confrontation. Anger resurfaces. His hand tightens unconsciously. A cookie crumbles in his grip. Closet gasps, scolding him for taking anger out on the snack. He apologizes quickly. She decides he needs air. Staying inside will not help. She suggests leaving the estate. A picnic by the lake to lift his spirits. Closet drags Antonio from the room despite his resistance. In the study, Klaus sits buried under towering stacks of documents. His gaze unfocused, pen unmoving. An aide calls to him twice before he responds. The aide asks if something is wrong. Klaus exhales heavily, admits a certain woman keeps irritating him and occupying his thoughts. The aide jolts, misreading the confession as romance. He grows excited, offers to arrange a meeting at once. Klaus rejects the idea. The aide presses, asking why else she would linger in his mind unless she cheated him. Klaus answers flatly that she did run off with his money. The aide falters, then regains composure. Regardless, the Duke looks exhausted. He suggests rest and offers to handle the paperwork. Klaus walks into the garden, irritated at himself for listening. The idea that he likes her feels absurd. It is the scent, he tells himself. That strange sweetness that lingers and disrupts his thoughts. His steps slow when he notices a boat on the lake. Closet sits inside with Antonio. On the water, Closet sips tea, pleased. She asks if the outing helps. Antonio answers without enthusiasm. His mood remains dark. She asks again if he is truly fine. He reassures her. Inside, frustration coils. The identity conflict and clash with the Duke are not things he can explain to her. A gust of wind tears Closet's hat away. It lands in the lake. Antonio moves to retrieve it. Closet waves it off, saying she can buy another. Irritation spikes at her careless wealth. He leans farther over the edge, muttering inwardly about her privilege. The boat tilts sharply. Closet shouts in alarm. Antonio overbalances. He falls. Cold water swallows him. Panic hits instantly. He cannot swim. He thrashes, lungs burning. Water fills his mouth. Strength drains fast. A bitter thought flashes through him. After everything, is this how it ends? Darkness creeps at the edges of his vision. Fear sharpens into desperation. He does not want to die. Through blurred water and rising bubbles, a figure cuts downward. A hand reaches toward him. Klaus dives from the shore and swims straight for the sinking Antonio. Duke Klaus drags a drowning Antonio out of the lake and lays him on the grass, both of them gasping as he desperately tries to bring the unconscious boy back to his senses. Furious and shaken, Klaus yells at him to cuff and breathe, demanding to know what he was thinking jumping into the water in the first place. As Antonio finally regains breath, tears stream down his face. He realizes that death, something he once treated like a distant concept tied to fate, has become terrifyingly real. Nearly drowning forces him to confront the truth. This life is no longer just a story or predetermined script. When he mutters that he truly thought he was going to die, the fear in his voice is unmistakable. Still trembling, Antonio weakly protests, asking whether the Duke really needs to scold someone who just almost lost his life. At that moment, Lady Closet rushes over in panic, calling his name. She checks his breathing before angrily scolding him for risking himself over something as trivial as a hat. Antonio apologizes repeatedly while Klaus stands nearby in silence. When Antonio notices the Duke staring at him with a strange, unreadable look, he feels unsettled. He thanks Klaus for saving him, but the Duke only tells him to be more careful next time and walks away. Closet complains about how cold and heartless the Duke is, unable to understand his detached reaction. Back in the palace, Klaus walks through the corridors soaked, water dripping onto the carpets. His aide blurts out that he looks like a drenched rat, but Klaus ignores him. Instead, his mind replays Antonio's tearful confession. I thought I was going to die. The memory stirs an unfamiliar emotion within him, something he cannot name. Meanwhile, at the Crown Princess's palace, Antonio reports on the progress of sponsored artists Nadia Erlos and Abello Hennem. The princess is relieved and then informs him that a delegation from the Refilios Empire will soon arrive. Marking the entrance of the sub-male lead, she announces a welcome banquet and unexpectedly asks Antonio to attend as a guest alongside his sister, Rosilia. Shocked, he tries to refuse, insisting that as a mere servant it would cause misunderstandings. The princess dramatically laments her loneliness and guilt over Rosilia, emotionally cornering him until he reluctantly agrees to discuss it with his sister. As Antonio leaves, overwhelmed by mounting complications, Crown Prince Esteban intercepts him, teasing Antonio for being cold. He suddenly asks whether he knows of the Refilios bloodline, rumored to emit a natural fragrance. Esteban notes that Antonio carries a faint scent and reminds him that he is not truly related by blood to the Hessink barony. When questioned about his real parents, Antonio admits he knows nothing. His mother died young without revealing anything. Esteban hints that the arriving delegation may hold answers about his origins, but before he can elaborate, a guard announces that the Refilios delegation has already passed the castle gates. The long foreshadowed turning point has finally arrived. As Crown Prince Esteban watches Antonio leave, his playful demeanor fades into something far more serious. He thinks to himself that he had been about to give the boy a warning. If Antonio doesn't learn to control on his own, the road ahead will be painfully difficult. Whatever secret lingers around him is growing stronger, and Esteban knows time is running short. Elsewhere, Alejandro, the Duke's closest secretary, reflects on his master's recent behavior. Duke Klaus, once completely absorbed in work, has begun sighing and muttering to himself, something he never used to do. Alejandro overhears fragments of restless thoughts and frustrated curses, concluding the Duke must be under immense stress. Deciding it's wiser not to interfere, he's startled when the Duke suddenly calls his name and coldly orders him to summon Antonio. Though he obeys at once, Alejandro can't help but pity the young aide. Antonio soon arrives, knocking cautiously before stepping inside. Seeing the Duke standing by the window with a sharp, unreadable gaze, he braces himself, wondering if this is about to turn into another confrontation. Instead, the Duke bluntly asks about Roselia, specifically whether she has a lover she's promised her future to. The question catches Antonio completely off guard. When he demands to know why, the Duke answers without hesitation, because he's interested. The admission shocks Antonio. Realizing the Duke's feelings are romantic, panic floods him. He already knows how this story is supposed to end, and in his mind, Roselia and the Duke must never be together. When pressed again for an answer, Antonio blurts out that it's not allowed, then quickly fabricates a lie, claiming Roselia does have a lover and that the Duke should give up. Klaus doesn't look convinced. Calmly, he questions what kind of lover would stand by while Roselia drowned in debt, lost her home, and was chased by thugs. Flustered, Antonio insists the man lives far away, arguing that distance doesn't invalidate love. The Duke falls into thoughtful silence, stroking his chin, while Antonio grows increasingly desperate, even contemplating fleeing the castle altogether. He loudly accuses the Duke of overstepping boundaries and insists Roselia would never meet another man while she has a lover. Klaus finds Antonio's fierce reaction odd. With his wealth, status, and background, he sees no reason for such resistance. He probes further, wondering if there's another reason behind it all. When Antonio slips into informal speech, the Duke pointedly calls it out. Finally, with a heavy sigh, Klaus dismisses him, concluding that Antonio simply loves his sister deeply. Though surprised, Antonio quickly exits, internally labeling the Duke a cold-blooded tyrant. Left alone, Klaus stares out the window, grappling with his own emotions. He wonders what answer he had hoped to hear. Forcing himself to regain composure, he insists that it isn't Antonio who unsettles him, it's Roselia. That must be the truth. Soon after, the delegation from the Refilios Empire arrives at Rugvelset. Crown Prince Esteban and Crown Princess Evelion welcome them warmly. A striking man with dark hair and green eyes introduces himself as Johannes von Euclid, a Marquis of Refilios. Evelion stares at him in visible shock. Sensing it, Esteban cautiously asks whether Johannes has a younger brother. He does not. But he did have a younger sister who vanished over a decade ago, with no confirmation of her fate. The princess apologizes for the painful topic and Johannes brushes it off politely, though inwardly he recalls his little sister Cecilia, last seen at only 3 years old, and wonders if she is even still alive. That night, the grand welcome banquet begins. In a carriage heading toward the palace, a lively blue-haired girl marvels that nearly every noble in the empire seems to be attending. Beside her sits Roselia, dressed elegantly in purple but visibly anxious. She murmurs that she no longer feels worthy of being called a noble. Her companion firmly reminds her that she is an honored guest personally invited by the Crown Prince and tells her to lift her head high. Swallowing her nerves, Roselia quietly agrees, unaware that the truths of her past may soon collide with her present. Lady Closet excitedly pulls Roselia into the grand banquet hall, buzzing with curiosity about which nobles they might encounter tonight. Before Roselia can steady her nerves, a gentleman approaches Closet with utmost courtesy, requesting the honor of her first dance. Closet happily accepts, laughing as she's whisked away, leaving Roselia standing alone and apologizing to her in her heart for being abandoned so quickly. Watching Closet effortlessly charm the room, Roselia notes her popularity and turns her focus to the real reason she came, to find the Refilios delegation. She wants to confirm the face of the so-called second male lead. Her gaze lands on a striking man whose presence alone commands attention, and she wonders if he might be the one. Trying to recall the original novel's description, she debates whether this is truly him or just her imagination running wild. Her thoughts are abruptly interrupted when Crown Prince Esteban approaches, teasingly calling her a professional escape artist. Roselia greets him with stiff formality, inwardly irritated. The prince claims he had only been trying to help her before and asks whether his actions were truly so excessive. When she politely apologizes and asks him to overlook any offense, he smiles mischievously and proposes a condition: if she grants him the first dance, he'll forgive her. Roselia fumes internally at his ill-tempered persistence. Elsewhere, Duke Klaus finishes reviewing documents and hands them to Alejandro, confirming he will attend the banquet to leave a favorable impression for negotiations with the Refilios delegation. As he walks away, he resolves to focus solely on work and forget both Antonio and Roselia for the night. Yet the moment he steps into the hall, that resolve crumbles. His eyes immediately find Roselia. His heart betrays him, pounding despite his determination. He tells himself it's a relief to see Roselia, not Antonio, but the confusion in his chest only deepens. Across the room, Esteban stands before Roselia and claims he has something important to discuss, something too sensitive for open ears. He asks to be her first dance partner. Before she can respond, the atmosphere shifts. Duke Klaus approaches, creating a ripple of shocked whispers among the guests. To everyone's astonishment, both the Crown Prince and Duke Balthazar extend their hands to the same woman at the same time. Murmurs spread rapidly. Who is she to command such attention? The tension thickens as the two men confront one another. Both turn to her, silently demanding a decision. Overwhelmed, Roselia internally protests. She wants neither of them, but if she must choose, she reasons that a cold-hearted man is safer than a married one. With trembling resolve, she places her hand in the Duke's. Klaus thanks her quietly. As they begin to dance, Roselia quickly clarifies that she didn't choose him out of preference. Klaus dryly remarks that she must truly dislike him. She then presses him for the real reason he intervened, suggesting it was to avoid putting the Crown Princess in an awkward position. Klaus briefly looks surprised before admitting she isn't wrong, but adds in a low voice that he also simply didn't want the Crown Prince to have her. His blunt confession makes her heart skip. She admits she doesn't understand him at all. Klaus gestures subtly toward Esteban, who is watching them with unmistakable intensity. He warns her that the moment the music ends, the prince will likely claim the next dance. Panic flickers across Roselia's face. Without another word, Klaus suddenly takes her hand and leads her away from the center of attention. He brings her to a quieter corner and tells her to remain there until the situation calms down. Then, more seriously, he questions how she became entangled with the Crown Prince in the first place. They barely know each other, so why has Esteban fixated on her? Klaus warns that the Crown Prince's interest is dangerous and that Roselia, more than anyone, should understand the risks of attracting royal attention. Hidden in the quiet corridor, Roselia turns away from Duke Klaus, her voice tight with frustration. She insists she never wanted the Crown Prince's attention in the first place and that the entire situation is exhausting. From their hiding spot, Klaus watches as Crown Prince Esteban walks past, his footsteps echoing through the hall. Roselia continues to grumble under her breath, swearing she isn't creating these dramatic scenes on purpose. As the prince draws dangerously close, Klaus suddenly pulls Roselia against him and raises a hand near her face, silently signaling her to be still. Startled, she freezes, staring up at him while Esteban passes by without noticing them. Klaus's gaze remains cold and sharp, tracking the prince until he disappears down the corridor. Once they are alone, the tension shifts. Klaus looks down at Roselia, his expression unreadable. He leans closer, eyes locked on hers, and murmurs that she has a very pleasant scent. Before she can process his words, he closes the distance and kisses her deeply. Roselia's mind blanks in shock, the world seeming to blur around them. When he pulls back slightly, still hovering close, he comments that her lips are warm. Reality crashes back in. Flustered and red-faced, Roselia shoves him away with force and covers her mouth, horrified at what just happened. Without another word, she bolts down the hallway, leaving Klaus kneeling in silence, staring at the floor as if questioning himself. Running through the palace, Roselia's thoughts spiral. She wonders what she's doing, whether she's lost her mind, whether she's somehow under a spell. Just then, a hand grips her shoulder. It's Crown Prince Esteban. He insists he needs to speak with her immediately and tells her that her scent is currently filling the entire palace. Confused, she repeats the word scent, unsure what he means. Esteban sighs, admitting he had wanted to warn her out of consideration for the past, but she keeps avoiding him. He complains that it's giving him a headache and cautions her that sooner or later, someone will notice. She should be careful, still bewildered. She asks what exactly she's supposed to be wary of. The prince adds one final warning, though he knows she's stuck at the Duke's estate. She should avoid getting too entangled with Klaus. He finds her surprisingly likable, and while that's inconvenient, he'd rather not have to deal with her personally. After he leaves, Roselia recalls the original storyline. Klaus is destined to become the villain, the one who drives a wedge between the crown prince and princess and sparks rebellion. This is supposed to be a love story where the royal couple triumphs over him. If that's true, then getting close to Klaus is the worst thing she could possibly do. She resolves to stay clear-headed and keep her distance at all costs. Unbeknownst to her, a scarred man with an eye patch watches everything from a balcony above, quietly sipping wine. Returning to the banquet hall, Roselia is immediately confronted by Lady Closet, who demands to know where she disappeared to. Roselia hastily denies doing anything suspicious, but her mind flashes back to the kiss. Closet teasingly accuses her of acting strange, and Roselia imagines the chaos that would erupt if the truth came out. Closet accusing her of daring to covet the Duke. The thought alone makes her cringe. She feels she deserved the scolding. Nervously, Roselia asks if she smells like anything unusual. Closet sniffs the air and says she smells nothing, joking that maybe Roselia skipped a bath. Relieved, Roselia claims she's unwell and asks to leave early. Closet notices her flushed face and agrees, arranging a carriage. Outside, while waiting, Roselia resolves to escape before encountering Klaus again. She has no idea how she could face him after that kiss and decides hiding for a while might be safest. But just as she thinks this, she spots Klaus nearby and panics, wondering if he's searching for her. At that moment, Marquise Johannes von Euclid approaches, informing her that the carriage has arrived. Acting on impulse, Roselia asks if she may ride with him instead. Though surprised, Johannes agrees and helps her into the carriage. From a distance, Klaus watches in stunned silence as Roselia departs alongside the Marquis, his expression darkening at the sight. From a distance, Duke Klaus watches Roselia leave the banquet beside Marquis Johannes von Euclid, his thoughts immediately turning dark. Antonio had insisted Roselia already had a lover, so is that man the one? The idea unsettles him. The more he replays it in his mind, the less he likes the possibility. Meanwhile, inside the carriage, Roselia finally exhales in relief. Having escaped the suffocating tension of the banquet, she feels momentarily safe. She thanks Johannes for agreeing to her sudden request without hesitation. The Marquis brushes it off politely, saying she must have had her reasons, and he simply couldn't refuse. When she asks to be dropped off nearby, he declines, explaining that it would be improper and dangerous for a lady to walk alone at night. He insists on escorting her all the way. Realizing she cannot return to the Duke's estate dressed as Roselia, she decides to stay the night at Nadia's home instead. During the ride, Johannes studies her carefully before commenting that they look remarkably alike. The observation startles her. Looking at him properly, she realizes the resemblance is undeniable. With a light laugh, Johannes says that since he's older, it would be more accurate to claim she resembles him. After all, people say everyone has a look alike somewhere in the world. Since fate brought them together like this, he suggests they exchange proper introductions. He introduces himself formally as Marquis Johannes von Euclid, representative of the Refilios delegation. Roselia freezes internally. This is the second male lead from the original story. No wonder he's so striking. She introduces herself as Roselia de Hessink, mentioning she has heard much about him. When they arrive, she thanks him sincerely and steps out. Johannes watches her leave, his gentle demeanor fading into calculation. He quietly orders a subordinate to investigate her. Though her hair color differs, the resemblance is uncanny. Back at the Balthazar Duchy that night, Lady Closet complains of exhaustion and announces she's heading to bed. When Klaus casually asks about Antonio, she snaps defensively that he's resting because he felt unwell and warns Klaus not to disturb him. Her reaction only deepens his suspicion. Later, Klaus goes to Antonio's room himself. After knocking and receiving no response, he enters, only to find it empty. So where did he go at this hour? At Nadia's home, the artist teasingly asks Roselia if she was kicked out. Roselia denies it, but Nadia smirks, guessing it must be a guy problem if she showed up so suddenly. Flustered, Roselia insists it's not like that. Their banter is interrupted when Nadia breaks into a coughing fit. Roselia anxiously asks if she's taken her medicine. Nadia assures her she's following treatment properly and just needs time to recover. Then jokingly tells Roselia to worry about her supposed boyfriend instead. The next morning, Roselia returns to the duchy disguised once more as Antonio, brushing off Nadia's teasing as nonsense. But the moment she enters her room, she freezes. Duke Klaus is already there, waiting. He demands to know where she's been all night. Caught off guard, Antonio insists it was personal business. Klaus's eyes narrow. Is he hiding a secret lover? Antonio tries to ask him to leave so he can change, but Klaus stops him, claiming he smells a faint trace of a woman's perfume. Did he truly meet someone? Frustrated, Antonio questions why any of this concerns the Duke. Klaus coldly reminds him that as his employer, it's his responsibility to supervise and protect his staff. He wants to know what was so important it kept him out overnight. Antonio pushes back, arguing that even an employer has no right to intrude on private matters. Why is he picking a fight first thing in the morning? Klaus counters sharply as a duke. He has the authority to question a commoner under imperial law. The tension thickens. Internally, Antonio fumes, branding him a cruel, heartless, cold-blooded devil, while Klaus's suspicion only grows stronger. Running on barely any sleep, Antonio decides he's had enough of Duke Klaus's relentless interrogation. The bed felt different, he couldn't rest, and now, at 7 in the morning, he's being grilled like a criminal. To end it quickly, he blurts out that he was meeting a friend. Klaus immediately demands details. Who? Would he even know them? And most importantly, was it a man or a woman? The question shocks them both. Antonio is irritated by the prying, while Klaus internally reels, unable to understand why he even asked. Why does he care? Why can't he stop himself? Cornered, Antonio snaps that it was a woman and asks if that satisfies him. The words land like a blow. Klaus repeats them under his breath, visibly unsettled. When Antonio tries to move on and prepare for work, Klaus stops him again, accusing him of letting his private life interfere with his duties. Antonio points out dryly that it isn't even work hours yet, it's barely dawn. Then, in an oddly heated outburst, Klaus criticizes everything: Antonio's tone, manners, posture, outfit, even his perfume. Apparently, everything about him is irritating. Antonio stares, wondering if the Duke ate something rotten for breakfast. Just as Klaus storms off, he halts and throws out a new order: arrange a meeting with Roselia as soon as possible. Antonio stiffens. Why not contact her directly? Klaus smirks and repeats Antonio's own earlier excuse: it's personal business. The hypocrisy is infuriating. Klaus presses further, asking where Roselia is staying. To him, it's obvious what kind of conversation she and Antonio would have about that incident. Antonio's mind flashes to the accidental kiss and panic spikes. He refuses, saying Roselia can't meet him because she's with someone important. Klaus immediately connects the dots to Marquis Euclid. So she's closer to the Marquis than he thought. The misunderstanding deepens, both men drawing the wrong conclusions from half-truths. Later, while watering flowers, Antonio vents aloud about Klaus being oblivious, stubborn, and cold. A lone wolf who never takes a hint. Lost in frustration, he overwaters the plants and nearly floods the garden. Artist Abello and young Erline catch him mid-disaster. They notice the worry written all over his face. Antonio tries to brush it off but eventually admits there's someone who keeps bothering him. He doesn't want anything to start, yet work forces them to see each other constantly. The awkwardness is unbearable. His thoughts drift back to the kiss and he berates himself for losing control for even a second. When Abello gently asks if he truly hates this person, Antonio overcompensates, declaring he hates him more than anyone in the world. Abello laughs softly, unconvinced. Avoidance won't solve anything, he says. Whether it's love or hate, Antonio needs to face the person and make a firm decision. Running away will only prolong the misery. The advice hits home. Antonio resolves to stop hiding. He'll reject the Duke clearly and put an end to the confusion once and for all. Determined, he walks through town, only to witness an elderly man being kicked out of a shop for having no money. The old man crashes to the ground, furious and humiliated. Antonio rushes to help, scolding the shopkeeper for rough treatment. But the old man is prickly and suspicious, accusing Antonio of stealing his missing money. Even when Antonio offers to escort him home, the man snaps that he can manage on his own and stomps away in a huff. Antonio watches him go, exasperated. First a jealous duke, now a cranky old man. Life, it seems, refuses to give him a moment's peace. Antonio watches the old man shuffle off, but guilt tugs at him. With a sigh, he rushes after him and grabs his arm, urgently asking if he even knows his home address. The man's vacant stare says enough. Something is wrong. Antonio quickly realizes he's dealing with dementia. Why is someone like this wandering alone without a guardian? The old man stubbornly insists he can manage by himself, then mutters an uncertain address. 6 Bronx Street, I think. Deciding he can't abandon him, Antonio takes his hand and leads the way. The old man grumbles about meddling but doesn't pull away. When they arrive, Antonio freezes. Before them stands a magnificent gated estate. Surely this can't be right. He assumes the old man gave the wrong address, until the man calmly unlocks the gate and walks inside. Panicking, Antonio follows, only to notice the nameplate Bernas. His mind blanks. This is the residence of Count Bernas. Stunned, he blurts out the obvious: "Are you the owner?" The answer is yes. The cranky old man is none other than Count Valdro de Bernas, a grand master and legendary genius painter. Antonio can hardly believe the coincidence. Of all people to randomly assist in the street, he stumbled upon a living legend. Inside the mansion, however, the glamour fades. Dust blankets the furniture, cobwebs stretch across corners, and the place feels abandoned. When Antonio asks about the servants, the Count matter-of-factly explains they all ran away because he forgot to pay them. Kids these days, he mutters. Antonio is speechless. Memories from the original novel surface. The Count had dementia there too, but during rare lucid moments, he created breathtaking masterpieces. One painting alone could wipe out Roselia's family debt. Heart racing, Antonio asks if he still paints. The Count blinks in confusion. Paint? Does he know how to paint? Horror creeps in. Has he forgotten even his own genius? Before Antonio can process it, the Count suddenly demands to know who he is and why he's trespassing. Antonio forces a smile, realizing this won't be simple. Helping this man will take time and patience. The scene shifts to the Imperial Palace guest annex. Lognon reports to Marquis Johannes von Euclid that he has investigated Roselia de Hissink. After the Baron died buried in debt, Roselia and her brother have worked tirelessly to repay it. Johannes stiffens at the word siblings. Lognon clarifies, they are not blood-related. The Baron remarried and registered Roselia and her mother into the family 19 years ago. 19 years, Johannes pales. 20 years ago, on that exact date, his mother and little sister Cecilia vanished. A memory flashes. A carriage accident, hooded figures, a woman and child taken away. The timing aligns too closely. He asks about Roselia's mother. Lognon replies she reportedly died 18 years ago. Johannes grips the table, devastated. Was he too late? If his mother survived the attack, why never return to the Marquisate? Was she still being pursued? Did she hide Cecilia to protect her? And if so, who was chasing them? He forces himself to calm down. It could be desperate speculation. But one thing is certain: he must confirm whether Roselia de Hessink is actually his missing sister, Cecilia. Back at the Count's mansion, Antonio finishes cleaning and beams at the transformation. He prepares a meal and cheerfully urges the Count to eat. The old man snaps at being called Grandpa. But Antonio ignores him, even attempting to feed him while preaching that a healthy body leads to a healthy mind. Then he adds brightly that the Count needs to recover and start painting again. For some reason, the Count feels a sudden ominous chill. As evening falls, Antonio promises to return tomorrow, waving off the man's gruff protests about the nickname. Later transformed back into Roselia and carrying her disguise in a suitcase, she boards a carriage to the Balthazar ducal house. Abello's words echo in her mind. Running away solves nothing. When the carriage arrives, she steps out gracefully in a floral gown, asking the driver to leave her luggage inside. Determined to face things head-on, she lifts her gaze and abruptly startles at what awaits her. This time she won't waver. She'll end the tangled mess between herself and Duke Klaus, cleanly, decisively. Inside his office, Klaus sits alone, brooding. The memory of their kiss refuses to fade. He exhales sharply, annoyed at himself. When a servant announces Roselia's arrival, he startles but quickly straightens, muttering that he'll remain calm. No anger, no irrationality. Roselia enters with the same mantra running through her head. Stay calm. She states plainly that she heard he wanted to see her. Klaus clears his throat and immediately demands to know where she's been. She replies that it's difficult to explain. His restraint snaps. Were you with that man? He presses. What man? She counters. The one you call your lover. The conversation derails instantly. Roselia internally begs him to stop before it becomes another disaster. Klaus curses under his breath, frustrated by his own agitation. She finally states coldly that whoever she was with is none of his business. Then she lays it out. She came to make one thing clear. She has no feelings for him. He is to stop troubling both her and Antonio. Klaus lets out a humorless laugh and rises from his chair. No feelings. Then what was that between us? He challenges, stepping closer. Roselia averts her gaze, insisting she was simply caught up in the moment. She already has a lover. It meant nothing. A mistake. His eyes darken. A mistake. Then let's see if this is one too. He pulls her into another kiss. Sudden, heated, undeniable. Roselia freezes as the world tilts. When he pulls back, he points out that despite claiming to have a lover, she didn't resist. Is that also just a mistake? Flushed and shaken, Roselia forces herself to speak. Fine, she'll admit it. Her body responds to him. But that doesn't change anything. It's nothing more than physical instinct. She remembers the fate of the original Roselia, who gave her heart and body to the Duke and died for it. She refuses to repeat that tragedy. So she asks him something chilling. If she were ever accused of treason and led to the scaffold, would he save her? Klaus is caught off guard. Treason. What is she talking about? But she studies him carefully. He's not the type to suffer losses. If protecting her cost him, would he truly do it? He tries to protest that she's being unfair, imagining an unlikely scenario, but he doesn't say he would save her. That hesitation is enough. She tells him not to shake her with words he doesn't mean and turns to leave. Klaus calls after her, but she doesn't stop. Outside the mansion, she exhales shakily. It's over. She's cut the thread that once led to her death in the original story. She won't die. That's all that matters, and yet... Warm tears slip down her cheeks. She stares at them in disbelief. How ridiculous. Her stupid body refuses to listen to her mind. Elsewhere, Marquis Johannes von Euclid arrives at the Balthazar Duchy. The guards inform him that without an appointment, he cannot see the Duke. Johannes replies calmly that he didn't come for the Duke. He came for a servant, Antonio. Roselia's whereabouts have been strangely impossible to trace, and if anyone can reach her, it's her so-called foster brother. As Johannes steps onto the grounds, he freezes. Ahead of him stands Roselia and Duke Klaus. Klaus has seized her hand, clearly mid-argument. Roselia struggles, demanding he let go and accusing him of storming off without listening. Klaus snaps back that he has nothing more to say. The tension is palpable. Klaus finally notices the newcomer and stiffens. Marquis Euclid, why are you here? Johannes watches the scene unfold, sharp eyes taking in every detail. Euclid steps in at the height of the confrontation, gripping Roselia's arm and sharply asking Duke Klaus if he cannot see that she is clearly distressed. Johannes immediately checks on her, his voice calm but firm. Roselia softly assures him she is fine, yet he keeps holding her arm, his expression unreadable as he studies her. A family heirloom rests in his hand, and as his gaze drops to it, something begins to connect in his mind. When the Duke suggests moving elsewhere, Johannes suddenly stops mid-step. His eyes widen as he catches a faint but unmistakable scent. The Lofilio's bloodline carries a unique fragrance, like pheromones, undetectable to the same sex but strongly sensed by the opposite, especially when emotions like joy, sorrow, or love intensify. In that moment, as Roselia stands shaken before him, Johannes realizes the truth. He looks at her not as the Marquise but as Cecilia, his long-lost sister. Overwhelmed, he refuses the Duke's lead and instead politely asks Roselia if she would allow them to relocate somewhere else. As they leave, emotions surge through him. After all these years, he has finally found her. He cannot stop wondering how much she must have suffered alone in a foreign land. Inside the carriage, he stares at her intensely, fighting the urge to confess that she is his sister and he is her brother. Roselia grows uncomfortable under his gaze but thanks him for helping her again. Deciding it is not the right time to reveal the truth, Johannes instead asks whether she has a serious issue with the Duke. Roselia nervously downplays it as a minor work disagreement, insisting she is fine. However, Johannes interprets this as proof that she is quietly suffering because of her debt to Klaus. Suddenly, he asks to get off the carriage, claiming urgent business. Roselia is startled, sensing an odd disappointment in him. Before leaving, he almost calls her Cecilia, quickly correcting himself and asking if he may see her again. Flustered, she questions why. He hurriedly clarifies that she simply reminds him of a little sister and urges her not to hesitate to seek his help. Though puzzled, she agrees. As he departs, Roselia reflects that a typical second lead should be annoying, yet Johanna's isn't, perhaps because he is handsome. Shrugging it off, she returns to her daily life. Back in disguise as Antonio, she presents a worship model to Count Bernas, hoping to stir his memories and revive his passion for painting. She has worked tirelessly for this moment. The Count scratches at his arm, dismissing it as a mosquito bite, but gradually begins reminiscing. He confirms that the man in a portrait is his son, now leading the Empire's top Navy fleet. Grumbling that the boy never checks on him, he recalls his own glory days commanding dozens of ships across the Callio Sea and winning the Battle of Claman, earning royal honors. But pride turns to pain. His voice trembles as he relives, "Hell on earth," shouting the name Vagnon and screaming orders to retreat, leaving the wounded behind. It takes time for him to calm down. Antonio gently offers warm tea, shaken by how deeply the trauma lingers. Feeling guilty for pushing him too far, Roselia silently apologizes. Just then, the doorbell rings. Surprised, Antonio answers, only to freeze in shock when Lady Closet cheerfully greets him, admitting she tracked him down after being ghosted and asking to see the Count first. At Count Bernas's home, the old man immediately shuts the door on his visitors, bluntly declaring he has no interest in buying anything. Antonio hurriedly introduces Lady Balthazar, but the Count snaps that he doesn't care about her title or status. He won't purchase a thing. Closet pulls Antonio aside, whispering skeptically whether this grumpy, seemingly senile elder could truly be the legendary artist they're searching for. Antonio assures her it's definitely him, but admits the Count hasn't been in good condition, which is why he hasn't even managed to see a single proper painting yet. Realizing Antonio needs the Count's help to escape Duke Klaus's control quickly, Closet eagerly volunteers to step in. Determined, Closet grabs a palette and brush, painting a simple, childlike house. When Antonio asks for the Count's opinion, the old man harshly criticizes it, claiming he could do better with his foot. Offended, Closet challenges him to prove it, but he refuses. Antonio tries to keep the peace while serving snacks, already realizing that getting the Count to paint again won't be easy. Unbothered, Closet sets up a fresh canvas, admitting she's actually enjoying herself. Even as the Count grumbles, he eventually joins them at the table. Later, Closet studies her new painting of blue flowers, sensing something is wrong but unable to pinpoint it. The Count watches silently before abruptly demanding the brush. He critiques her technique, too much paint, and the vase stands out more than the flowers when the viewer's focus should be the blooms. Then, without hesitation, he begins painting himself. Antonio and Closet stare in shock as his skill resurfaces effortlessly. The artwork instantly improves. Closet beams, praising his talent, while the Count stares at his own hands as if surprised by what they can still do. The light mood shatters when the Count suddenly turns to Antonio and bluntly asks why he's wearing men's clothes. Roselia freezes in panic, asking him to repeat himself. But just as quickly, his mind slips again. He insists he only said he was hungry and seems confused about what he'd mentioned. The moment passes, but the near exposure leaves Roselia shaken. Back at Duke Balthazar's estate, Closet and Antonio walk the halls, both admitting how nerve-wracking the incident was. They truly thought the disguise had been uncovered. Their conversation is cut short when Duke Klaus suddenly appears. Closet scolds him for startling them and brushes off his probing questions before dragging Antonio away. However, Klaus stops Antonio briefly and quietly asks if Roselia said anything. Antonio denies it. Left alone, Klaus watches them leave with a somber expression. The scene shifts to the Imperial Palace, where Marquis Johannes approaches Klaus and apologizes for his earlier rudeness. Casually, he mentions hearing that Klaus and Roselia are longtime lovers. Klaus nearly chokes on his drink in shock. Johannes explains that Cecilia told him so and expresses how happy he was to reunite with her after so many years, though he senses there's more beneath the surface. As he studies Klaus, he realizes his sister is now deeply entangled with the Duke. Meanwhile, in Closet's room, Antonio marvels at a landscape painting she has completed using the Count's advice. The improvement is undeniable, and he's stunned that the original story never highlighted this hidden talent of hers. Their admiration is interrupted when Klaus enters, carrying a covered birdcage. Closet finds it unusual that he brought it himself instead of sending a servant. Revealing the gift, Klaus presents a yellow canary. Closet and Antonio find it adorable, while Klaus awkwardly clears his throat, clearly unsure how to handle the attention as they admire the bird. Antonio quietly observes Klaus interacting with Closet and finds himself genuinely surprised. He never imagined Duke Klaus was capable of smiling so naturally, yet there he is, watching Closet fondly as she wonders what to name her new canary. The brief warmth on the Duke's face unsettles Antonio more than his usual coldness ever did. Suddenly, Klaus turns his sharp gaze toward him and calls his name. Startled, Antonio straightens at once. To his shock, Klaus casually invites him to have tea sometime. The unexpected offer leaves Antonio confused. Until now, the Duke had only ever spoken to him stiffly while standing at a distance, so why this sudden civility? Soon, they sit across from each other in a grand room, tea poured into delicate floral cups. As Antonio carefully sips, he wonders if something has shifted in Klaus's personality. For a fleeting second, he even worries about poison. Breaking the silence, Klaus comments on the remaining debt, now reduced to about 1,000 barang in less than 3 months. and admits he hadn't expected Antonio to repay even half. The faint smile that follows makes Antonio blush against his will. He warns himself not to get attached, but Klaus notices his reaction. Then comes an even greater shock. Klaus formally suggests that Antonio continue living at the estate even after repaying the debt. He acknowledges Antonio's sharp eye for art and points out that if he intends to raise Roselia, he will need steady income. He even offers support, or a nearby house if preferred. Antonio firmly refuses, insisting he plans to leave once the debt is cleared. When Klaus asks where he intends to go, Antonio realizes he hasn't thought that far. His only goal has been escape. Out of nowhere, Klaus asks whether he plans to leave for Refilios with Roselia. Confused, Antonio listens as Klaus calmly states that it makes sense. After all, Roselia's beloved is Marquis Euclid. The word beloved makes Antonio choke. Panicking, he nervously confirms the lie, accidentally knocking over his teacup in the process. Mortified, he kneels to clean up while questioning why Klaus would assume such a thing. Telling such a lie about a foreign marquis feels reckless, but he decides he will sort it out later. Klaus then adds something strange. Antonio and Roselia carry a similar scent. He asks if they use the same perfume. Thinking quickly, Antonio blames it on soap. Klaus simply tells him to consider the offer carefully before dismissing him. Once outside, Antonio exhales in relief, wondering what has gotten into the Duke. He blushes again, scolding himself for being swayed. After all, this is Duke Balthazar. He also resolves that he truly needs to stop cross-dressing, despite having sworn otherwise. The scene shifts to the Crown Princess's palace, where Avelian expresses concern after hearing Antonio fell into the lake. Closet clarifies that he fell rather than jumped, and Roselia questions why she's even attending this tea gathering. Ivlian remarks that the Duke is unexpectedly kind and recalls a childhood memory 8 years ago. Klaus brought home a live rabbit, intending to skin it to make a muff for Closet, until young Closet burst into tears. Roselia finds the story oddly revealing. As the tea continues, Closet asks about a rumor that certain Refilios bloodline members emit a natural scent. Roselia nearly chokes at the question. Ivlian explains that historical records mention such a trait, though the blood has diluted over time. Supposedly, hares are taught to control and suppress the fragrance, making them no different from ordinary people. Just then, Marquis Johannes approaches and politely asks to join them. Ivlian recognizes him immediately. He hesitates, unsure if his presence is welcome, but Closet cheerfully accepts. Roselia watches in surprise as the conversation shifts once more. At the Crown Princess's tea table, Ivlian warmly invites Marquis Johannes to sit. As he approaches, Roselia catches a faint, elegant fragrance drifting from him. It's subtle but unmistakable, and her mind immediately jumps to the earlier discussion about the Refilios bloodline's natural scent. Is he wearing perfume? Or is this the very phenomenon Avelian described? Johannes greets them politely and turns his attention to Roselia, asking if she has been well. She answers calmly, though her thoughts are anything but steady. The air around him feels charged, and she can't ignore the scent. Later, back at the Balthazar estate, Closet corners Roselia and demands to know when she became acquainted with such a prominent marquis. Roselia vaguely explains they met at a palace party. Just as she prepares to clarify matters about her supposed partner, Johannes steps closer and gently asks for a moment of her time. When he reaches toward her hair, she startles. Internally, Johannes notes that her scent is unusually strong enough to signal that her blossoming is approaching. It's clear to him that she doesn't know how to control it, which is why it's leaking so openly. Outwardly calm, he merely removes a flower petal from her hair, but inwardly, he's troubled. If she doesn't learn to suppress the scent before her awakening, she could be in danger. He silently vows to remain by her side when that time comes. The atmosphere shifts sharply when Duke Klaus appears. His gaze lands on the pair, his presence heavy and possessive. He remarks coolly on their boldness in inviting a guest to his estate without informing him. Roselia stays quiet, unsettled by facing him again in her true identity. Johannes apologizes for the unannounced visit, and Klaus replies with polite restraint until he asks Roselia for a private word. Before she can respond, Johannes intervenes, claiming she has something to discuss with him. Then, without hesitation, he declares himself her lover and asks for the Duke's understanding. The statement leaves both Roselia and Closet stunned. Johannes even adds that he hopes the Duke will refrain from treating Roselia disrespectfully. Klaus scoffs, reminding him this is Luke Velzit, not Refilios, and provoking a duke in his own estate is unwise. Johannes counters that when it comes to his beloved's comfort, rank and territory mean nothing, not even if the obstacle were a duke, crown prince, or emperor. Overwhelmed, Roselia finally shouts for both of them to stop. Spotting a messenger approaching, she hastily uses it as an excuse to dismiss Johannes. Before leaving, he whispers that his earlier offer of help was sincere. Klaus watches him go, then quietly reminds Roselia not to forget what he previously said. He shifts the topic abruptly, inviting her to join him for a meal. Suspicious at first, Roselia nearly refuses, until Klaus gives her a strangely pitiful look, like a scolded dog. Even Closet is stunned by her brother's behavior. Against her better judgment, Roselia agrees, telling herself it's just dinner. At sunset, the three sit at a long formal table as aged steak is served. The silence is suffocating. Roselia feels like she can't breathe, ironically because nothing dramatic is happening. Closet finally slams the table, demanding to know what's gotten into Klaus. He calmly insists he simply wanted to dine with them and casually remarks that it's a shame Antonio isn't present. The dinner unfolds under an uneasy tension as Duke Klaus calmly expresses relief that Roselia is enjoying the meal. His tone is gentle, far too gentle. Lady Closet, however, is horrified, convinced her cold, sharp-tongued brother has been possessed by some evil spirit. She internally panics at how uncharacteristically kind he has become. Roselia feels the same discomfort. The sudden warmth in his voice unsettles her more than his usual indifference ever did. Later, back in her room, the emotional strain catches up to Roselia. Nausea rises in her throat as she replays Klaus's strange behavior. She hurriedly gathers her belongings, determined to leave the estate before things grow even more complicated. But fate intervenes in the hallway. Klaus appears, noting that Antonio has not yet returned and questioning whether she truly wishes to leave without seeing her brother. Roselia quickly brushes it off, insisting she can meet him another time. The conversation shifts when Klaus mentions Marquis Johans, pointing out that the man seems unwilling to settle her family's debt. Roselia stiffens, defending it as a private matter. Then Klaus's gaze drops to her wrist, the one he had gripped harshly before. He notices the redness and admits he let his emotions overtake him. The scent of alcohol surrounds him, and when Roselia points it out, he does not deny it. Instead, he does something even more shocking. He apologizes. Not just for tonight, but for the cruel words he once threw at her, the humiliating insinuations about her worth. His voice carries genuine regret. Then, in a possessive confession, he declares that had it been his choice, he would have paid off her entire debt himself. Just so he would never have to share what is his with anyone else. The implication stuns Roselia. Before she can fully process it, Clay leans closer, his voice soft and desperate in a way she has never heard before, begging her not to go. For a fleeting moment, it feels as though the world hinges on her answer. Overwhelmed by the vulnerability in his plea, Roselia flees. As she runs, her thoughts spiral. Has the once cold and distant Duke truly changed because of her? She immediately rejects the idea, reminding herself of the vow she made never to fall for him. She blames the wine, the moonlight, anything but her own weakening resolve. The next day, Closet corners Roselia with a blunt question. Why is Marquis Johans her lover? Embarrassed, Roselia admits it was a lie she told the Duke, and the Marquis merely played along. Closet argues that no man would maintain such a bold deception without real feelings involved. Yet Roselia vehemently denies it. While she admits the Marquis is handsome and pleasant company, she feels nothing romantic toward him. If anything, she assumes he is simply amused by the situation. Meanwhile, Klaus stands by a window, staring absently at Antonio. Something about the young man unsettles him. The striking resemblance to Roselia is too strong to ignore. His secretary, Alejandro, interrupts with documents regarding the school construction project. Klaus snaps irritably before realizing he had been lost in thought. As Alejandro outlines details about shops and residences, Klaus remains distracted, silently questioning why Antonio and Roselia look so alike. That night, at the Count's house, Antonio finishes his duties and bids his grandfather good night. Yet he hesitates to return home. He dreads facing Klaus after everything that has happened. Trying to delay the inevitable, he decides to tidy up further and steps into the Count's study, only to freeze in shock at what awaits him inside. Antonio steps into the Count's study intending to tidy up, only to freeze at the sight of a massive stack of official documents piled across the desk. Curious, he picks one up, and his breath catches. The letter bears the seal of the Esquivan Naval Base, 3rd Fleet. Addressed formally to Count Valdro de Bernas, its opening line carries a heavy, sorrowful tone. As his eyes scan the page, the devastating truth becomes clear. Ashton de Bernas, the Count's only son, was killed in battle. The words hit Antonio like a physical blow. For a moment, he can only stare blankly at the paper before letting out a hollow laugh of disbelief. Turning toward the sleeping Count, everything suddenly makes sense. 6 months ago, the same time the Count collapsed, was when this notice must have arrived. The shock of losing his son had broken him, triggering the onset of dementia. Watching the old man rest peacefully, unaware of the tragedy that shattered his life, Antonio feels a deep ache in his chest. Perhaps he thinks quietly forgetting is a mercy. At least this way, the Count doesn't have to relive the pain. Later that night, as Antonio steps outside, a hooded figure suddenly rushes past him, knocking him to the ground before disappearing into the darkness without so much as an apology. Dazed and irritated, Antonio looks toward where the stranger came from, and realizes it's the school construction site. A chilling memory surfaces from the original novel, The Dreamleaf Incident. That very site was once used to traffic Dreamleaf, a highly addictive and strictly regulated hallucinogen. In the original timeline, Klaus had been caught with it there, creating a permanent rift between him and the Crown Prince. Heart-pounding, Antonio connects the dots. If Dreamleaf is planted at the site again, history could repeat itself. But Klaus had only engaged in legal ventures so far. What if someone is deliberately framing him? Without hesitation, Antonio chases after the hooded figure, shouting for them to stop. The workers should all be gone at this hour. Something is clearly wrong. Unable to ignore the possibility of a setup, Antonio rushes straight to the Duke's office and bursts in, breathless, announcing an emergency. Klaus is startled by his sudden appearance. Antonio struggles internally. How can he explain knowledge of future events without sounding insane? He settles on a partial truth. claiming he saw a suspicious person and warning that Dreamleaf might be hidden at the site. Klaus, skeptical, questions how Antonio could possibly know that. Antonio insists a thorough investigation would be wise, if only for security. Before addressing the claim, however, Klaus notices the scrape on Antonio's hand. Concern replaces his sharp tone as he takes Antonio's injured hand to inspect it. The gesture catches Antonio off guard. Though he tries to brush it off as nothing, Klaus remains firm, ordering him to get treated immediately and stop meddling in unnecessary matters. The construction site, he assures him, is already under tight security. Frustrated but unable to argue further, Antonio reluctantly agrees. Yet later that night, unable to rest, Antonio returns to the construction site anyway. Hiding behind crates and camouflaging himself with leafy branches, he shivers in the cold. Cursing his own interference, he wonders why he's risking so much, whether Klaus' lives or falls shouldn't matter to him. Still he waits, hungry and irritated, determined to catch the culprit if they return. Elsewhere, Klaus himself steps out late accompanied by Alejandro. Though he suggests heading back, something clearly weighs on his mind. He decides to make one quick stop before returning. Back at the site, Antonio's patience pays off. The hooded figure reappears and retrieves a hidden bag, filled with Dreamleaf. Antonio's suspicion is confirmed. He confronts the person, demanding they reveal the stash. Startled, the figure flees, but in the scramble, a golden medallion slips from their grasp and falls to the ground, glinting in the darkness. Alone in the dark construction site, Antonio notices something faintly glinting in the dirt. His eyes widen as he crouches down and brushes aside the soil, revealing an ornate golden medallion. The intricate design is unmistakably expensive, important. The weight of the discovery settles over him instantly. Whatever larger scheme is unfolding, the priority is clear: gather solid evidence before it disappears. As he searches further, the quiet night is broken by the faint sound of shifting debris. Hidden nearby, the hooded culprit freezes. Realizing someone else is present, unaware of the eyes on him, Antonio uncovers a concealed white bag. The moment he opens it, his fears are confirmed. Inside are bundles of Dreamleaf, the illegal hallucinogenic plant that once destroyed Klaus's reputation in the original timeline. This isn't speculation anymore. Someone is actively trying to frame the Duke. Clutching the evidence, Antonio quickly considers his next move. But before he can act, a sharp cracking noise splits the air above him. He looks up just as the wooden scaffolding groans and begins to collapse. Massive beams splinter and crash downward. Antonio stands frozen in shock until a dark figure lunges toward him. Klaus. The Duke throws himself over Antonio, shielding him as the structure crashes down in an explosion of wood and dust. Alejandro's horrified shout echoes through the chaos while the hooded culprit takes advantage of the confusion and flees into the forest. Beneath the wreckage, Klaus remains hunched over Antonio, breathing heavily. When Antonio looks up, he sees a dark stain spreading across the Duke's shoulder blood. Despite the pain, Klaus commands him not to move. Antonio's mind spirals. Why would the Duke risk himself like this? Alejandro calls out frantically from beyond the debris, and Antonio realizes with dread that Klaus is seriously hurt. As Alejandro rushes off to gather workers, Antonio trembles, pointing out the blood seeping through Klaus's clothes. Klaus groans but tells him to stay quiet. Antonio's panic is draining what little strength he has left. Then, in a low voice, Klaus admits that seeing Antonio injured would have stressed him far more than his own wounds. He insists they remain still until help arrives. Antonio feels the Duke's weight growing heavier as his strength fades and guilt crushes him. If Klaus hadn't intervened, that beam would have shattered his smaller frame instantly. Even now, the thought makes Klaus's blood run cold. When Antonio reaches up to wipe the sweat forming on Klaus's face, the Duke flinches and sternly repeats his order not to move. Antonio immediately obeys. Soon Alejandro returns with workers. Using levers, they carefully prop up the remaining columns to prevent a second collapse. After tense moments of straining wood and falling dust, they finally shift the debris. Klaus staggers out, supported by Alejandro, who bombards him with worried questions while demanding to know what Antonio was doing there in the first place. Before explanations can begin, Lady Closet arrives in a panic, screaming Antonio's name. She rushes to him, checking for injuries, only to learn that Klaus is the one badly hurt. The realization drains the color from her face. Antonio apologizes repeatedly, blaming himself, but Closet sharply tells him it isn't his fault. Klaus tries to brush off her concern, urging her to return to bed. That only makes things worse. Closet's voice cracks as she brings up their father and an old memory, how he once reassured her that his wounds weren't serious, promising a family picnic that never came. In truth, their parents died young in a carriage accident, the Duchess instantly, the Duke later at the mansion. Losing them both at once left scars neither sibling ever healed from. Through tears, Closet lashes out, threatening never to call Klaus her brother again if he dares to die and leave her alone. The outburst hangs heavy in the night air. Klaus, exhausted but steady, reaches up and gently pats her head. With a faint smile, he asks how he could ever die and abandon her. His death, he adds quietly, would ruin everything. Grumbling through her tears but visibly relieved, Closet regains her composure and orders both men back to the mansion at once. Whatever conspiracies are unfolding, injuries come first. Lady Closet lingers for a moment, arms crossed and pride barely masking her lingering fear. With a sharp huff, she turns her back on both Klaus and Antonio and storms off, her skirts rustling in the night. The two men remain standing amid the wreckage, watching her retreat with equally tired expressions. Later, inside the mansion, Klaus sits bare, torsoed on a bench while Alejandro carefully tends to his injuries. The secretary wraps fresh bandages around the Duke's broad torso, visibly relieved that the collapse wasn't fatal. He advises frequent bandage changes to prevent scarring and long-term damage. Yet Klaus barely reacts to his own condition. His first concern is Antonio. Alejandro reassures him that Antonio suffered nothing more than minor scrapes. The Duke alone took the brunt of the impact. Before leaving, Alejandro reveals something found during the cleanup. From a small container, he presents several sprigs of dreamleaf. The illegal plant had indeed been hidden at the site. Klaus's expression darkens as the reality sinks in. If events had unfolded differently, he could have been imprisoned by the imperial family. This was no coincidence. Someone is trying to frame him. Alejandro suggests a full investigation, then withdraws for the night after one final reminder about the bandages. Alone in his chambers, Klaus stares at the dreamleaf on the table. The implications are chilling. But one question troubles him even more. If this was a secret scheme, how did Antonio know to warn him? His head throbs as he contemplates the puzzle. Just as he prepares to change his bandages again, a soft knock interrupts him. Antonio enters hesitantly, explaining that he never properly thanked Klaus for saving him, and that he has something important to report. He freezes mid-sentence. Klaus is standing shirtless in the middle of the room, holding a roll of bandages. Antonio's face flushes crimson as he stammers in shock, demanding to know why the Duke is undressed. Klaus calmly explains he was simply rewrapping his wounds, confused by the outburst. Shaking off his flustered state, Antonio produces the golden medallion he found at the site. He explains it was dropped by the person who concealed the dream leaf. Klaus studies it closely. The act was deliberate. Yet the emblem is unfamiliar. No noble house he recognizes uses such a crest. It resembles a badge meant to be pinned, but lacks any fastening. Someone important, perhaps. Antonio's thoughts race through fragments of the original story. If Klaus isn't the mastermind, then who benefits from framing him? A sudden realization strikes. Carefully, he suggests investigating Grand Duke Rubilio. Klaus's reaction is immediate and sharp. The Grand Duke is a direct member of the imperial family, the former emperor's younger brother and uncle to the crown prince, standing next in line after him. To even imply suspicion borders on treason. Klaus warns that if anyone else overheard such words, Antonio would vanish without a trace. The danger is real. Antonio bows his head but insists it is better to be cautious than blindsided. With a heavy sigh, Klaus remarks that Antonio and Roselia are equally unpredictable, always stirring trouble. He orders Antonio to stop involving himself, to forget the Grand Duke entirely. Placing the medallion into a drawer with a firm thud, he declares he will handle the matter alone. When Antonio tries to protest, Klaus cuts him off, reminding him how close he came to death that very day. For now, he is to remain quietly inside the mansion.